you for joining us. This is the April 25th meeting of the Brookline School Committee. And we will start with our calendar, which is before you. There is a upcoming school committee meetings. The next one is on May 9th, and that is after the annual town election on May 7th. There are various other meetings posted, and there are various interesting activities and celebrations that are all posted, and the mental health event at the Cyclorama. There is Celebrating Teachers, always a big draw on May 14th at Newbury College. Is any other events that upcoming events anyone wants to announce? Yes.
I wanted to promote next Wednesday, May 1st, is Walk, Bike, and Roll to School Day. And so Safe Routes to School is encouraging that in partnership with Mass DOT. And so we're encouraging everyone to walk, bike, or roll to school on Wednesday. I believe all of our elementary schools are participating in some capacity. In fact, Pierce has organized a group, and some of the students are going to be coming in by train, and they're going to have an escort, and they're going to be walking to school. They'll have a police escort. It's pretty cool. So they're going to be walking. And so we just encourage everybody to get out and walk or use non-motorized transportation. Question?
All right.
Yeah, I did have a question. I'm sorry. When is our retreat in the summer?
Oh, the summer workshop?
Yeah.
I
Anybody
don't
know?
believe it's been scheduled yet.
Yes,
Oh,
it
it's not
was.
scheduled.
Yes,
Oh,
I
it was?
thought it was.
Yeah, I'll tell
July
you.
9.
I think that's right, something like that.
I know it's a little bit away, but.
July 9, right?
July 9, summer workshop.
Okay, thank you.
It usually runs 2 to 8, 2 p.m. to 8 p.m.
Mhm.
Thank you. Next up is our consent agenda, which is very full. We have minutes from 3 recent meetings, a student trip, the French exchange, which is in 2020, and then we have a whole series of items that relate to building projects. And there's a grant acceptance, or a yes, a grant application. Yes.
I can speak to the grant application if people want. We reviewed it at Capital Subcommittee. They came and spoke to us about this grant for a composting project. It's a leadership grant to help to pay for high school kids to help elementary school kids in terms of composting, and it's a wide-ranging grant that they applied to, and we'll see what happens if they get it. But in the meantime, I think it would be good for us to vote it.
So-
And the recommendation from the committee, I think, was to approve it.
Yes, the committee did, that's right. So I would entertain a motion on the consent agenda. Yes, what?
We did not get to all of these items in finance.
So,
I think it was one item, number 10.
Oh,
Did we do 9? 9 was.
that's what I
9
just-
capital
Oh,
recommends.
no, sorry. I mean, not 9. I'm on the next one. Never mind. Yes, 10. Sorry, I'm at the next one down.
So would you like to take acceptance of history and social science planning implementation grant off of the
Unless
consent
somebody
agenda?
wants to speak, if you think it's going to be not controversial, and you just want to speak to it for a second, because we just didn't get to it at finance. So I don't know if it's time sensitive or not.
It's a grant to support the Social Studies Department that will lead curriculum workshops June 26th to 28th with an outside consulting firm. So they are
What's going on tonight?
So the funding is to fund the curriculum consultant and the workshop rate for teachers in attendance. Your package should have
Yes.
some additional information and detail about that, so you don't believe it's controversial.
It also seems to be somewhat time sensitive.
It seems to me such a
We'd like to be able to execute contracts and organize the training.
Is this high school or
It's
middle
no,
school?
it's
or-
everybody.
Everybody.
There's kindergarten.
Kindergarten. It's actually K-8.
That's the needs assessment.
So, do we know what it's addressing? I'm just, what the topic is? It's all in here.
Yeah.
I just haven't looked at this.
It looks like there's a needs assessment at the front, and then it looks like
The grant is aimed at
activities for 6, 7.
assisting- yeah, the grant is aimed at assisting to create and maintain high-quality education programming that supports students' abilities to analyze complex issues, consider diverse perspectives, utilize logistical reasoning, and engage in civic discourse connected to a wide range of topics in history and social science. So it looks like they're going to thread in a number of those comments into a variety of different units that we have at different grade levels. iCivics, yes.
And
I believe iCivics is the consultant working with our teachers.
7, 8.
do you know this? Was there a reason this didn't go through curriculum, actually?
It's a grant, so that's my.
Yeah, but it's a curriculum grant.
Would anyone like to pull this off the consent agenda? If not, I would entertain a motion, if someone wants to make one, on the consent agenda. It might be a long night, otherwise, if we have to go through these one at a time. But we can take them up one at a time.
So I have to abstain on the March 14th meeting.
Okay, if no one's going to make a motion,
I'll make a motion that we pass the past record. Let's get those out of the way.
well, we can take them off the consent agenda.
I'll move it.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Anyone?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Charlupski. Discussion. I noted that Ms. Charlupski wasn't present at what meeting?
March 14th.
March 14th. Any further discussion on the consent agenda? Yes.
Notice that 2 items before us are,
Your microphone's not on.
2 items before us include the left field project management for services related to the Driscoll School schematics, and another one for Baldwin. I think we would probably be better off approving those at a subsequent school committee meeting because we have the vote on May 7th. That's coming up soon enough. So I think we should vote on this afterwards.
I had actually asked for Ray to be here, our project manager.
Left field has already started work. There's 2 things. We need the Inspector General's application. We started that in anticipation of the May 7th vote, and the Inspector General's vote is to go for construction management at risk, which is item C of item 1. And then also, we're also doing what's called a reconciliation estimate with the estimate we have to make sure that Jonathan Levy's estimate is right on. So they're busy at work on the project. I need to get this contract out to them. Shouldn't be based on the May 7th vote. This goes through the end of May. So there's 2 things we've asked them to do. The Inspector General's vote for doing construction management at risk and doing reconciliation.
And if the vote were to go down, what would happen with this?
We pay him for the reconciliation estimate and for preparing the application to the Inspector General's office for construction management at risk. We need to keep this project moving forward, and as soon as that vote's taken on May 7th, if it's positive, put that vote right in. We're going to put the application in, and what that's going to allow us to do is hire a contractor. So this is a very fast-paced project, and we need to anticipate a positive vote
You're talking about a CM at risk.
for the CMS.
They just remind me, am I remembering correctly that construction costs are approximately 8% per year? And so if we delay this, is there an impact on the timeline at the other side of it, or?
No, it's just that, to be fair, Left Field came on board and they've started working. So we always do a reconciliation estimate. Schematic design didn't start until late in the process. We didn't have an estimate until February. And then getting the OPM on board based on everything that's happened on the vote. I brought him on board, told him, directed him to go so we could have that reconciliation, to make sure when we go to Maytown meeting that the budget is not higher. And in fact, the reconciliation, the estimate that was done by Left Field is lower. So now they need to reconcile and figure out what the final cost is for both projects.
So town meeting voted funding for for schematic design in December? Is that
December.
when we voted?
That's correct.
Right, we voted those funds. And we don't have the authorization to get into construction documents or construction money either from the voters or from town meeting, which will meet on May 21st or whatever. But this has been part of schematic, is bringing these contractors on, this contractor on. And is there remaining funds in the schematic budget to cover these expenses?
Yes, this was always envisioned as part of schematic.
Right, so it's still part of schematic, it's just a new contractor that's part of that
Correct.
work.
I'm your inside OPM. We're just adding bodies to assist.
But we're not getting ahead of ourselves in terms of the source of funds.
No, the source of funds.
This is the monies that were already voted back in.
Funded and was always envisioned
Right, I think that's the
during this short period. of
that's the
time.
clarification
Thank you.
I needed.
I
anyway.
didn't convey correctly.
Okay, and we haven't quite got to the CM vote, that's separate.
That is correct.
Okay. Other questions on the consent agenda? Yes.
I think a quick one. There are two for the high school project. Do you recommend? I'm just verifying that you recommend, and we need these things.
I do.
All right. All right, on the question, all in favor? That is unanimous. Very well. So tell us about this CM at risk vote for authorization to proceed with CM at risk.
Ways, Mr. Chairman, of hiring a contract. You can design, bid, build. That's the old way of doing it. Or you can bring on a construction manager at risk, which is a qualification-based process. So you can hire the construction manager early based on their qualifications, and then the CM is brought on as a member of the team. They provide feedback to all the issues, and they're just brought on early and really can start looking at the construction documents and be another set of eyes and ears. And I would say 98% of the towns and communities are doing construction management at risk.
And it's the system that we used for the Coolidge Corner School project and that we're using on the high school.
Correct. And like I said, for the inspector, you have to apply to the Inspector General to use CM at risk. And as part of the application, we need a vote by the
Right.
governing body.
So is there anything about taking this vote now before the voters speak that is putting the cart before the horse?
Because taking the vote now is, we'll be ready for May 7th, and we'll be able to put it,
So the vote is just saying, should the project go forward, the school committee endorses the recommendation that we use the construction management risk approach.
correct. You're just proving the approach. And this is about a 4 to 6 week process. So I'm trying to get it so right after town meeting, when we get another positive votes, oops, sorry, and we get the approval, then we'll be able to put out the documentation to hire a construction manager.
Questions?
No, I'll move it.
Thank you. Is there a second? Thank you, Ms. Federspiel. Okay, so on the motion, all in favor? Great. Thank you, Mr. Masick.
Can I say one thing?
Yes.
I would like to thank Mr. Masak for thinking ahead so beautifully, so that things are all lined up, so we're not getting carts ahead of horses, and yet
Robin.
horses are ready to run. So,
We're trying to get the horses ready.
yes, thank you for helping get the horses ready to run. It's so wonderful, so that it's just all ready to go. Thank you.
Great. Okay, it's time for public comment. Thank you very much. We'll start with Deb McCarthy.
Hi.
Hey, come tell us who you are and speak to us.
And this is on. Yes?
Yeah,
Can you hear
you're
me?
good to go. Yeah, you don't have to, you
It's
don't have to lean
okay.
over.
But I do need my glasses so I can read. Good evening. My name is Deb McCarthy, and I am a fifth grade teacher from the town of Hull. I am the president of the Hull Teachers Association, a member of the board of directors for the Massachusetts Teachers Association, and I also serve as the chair of the Governmental Relations Committee for the MTA, a committee that is charged with creating a legislative package for our 110,000 member union. I am appearing before you tonight to share a first-hand account of how the Hull School Committee and the Hull Teachers Association have successfully engaged in contract negotiations these past 3 months, bargaining sessions that are in the open for every member in our association. We have held 3 bargaining sessions so far, and our next scheduled meeting is Monday. At these sessions, every member of our association is invited to attend, and we have had a participation rate from our members of about 40%. 8 members of our bargaining team sit at the table. However, if one of our association members who is not at the table would like to address a conversation, a member of our team will just switch seats so that that member who needs to share information is afforded the liberty to speak their truths. As someone who has participated in contract bargaining sessions for over 15 years' time, I can state without equivocation that open bargaining for our local has been transforming. An educator's working condition is a student's learning condition. And when we bargain for working conditions in the open, we enhance the learning conditions of our students because we engage in a process that provides an opportunity for the collective wisdom, the collective investment, and collective shared decision-making by all of the stakeholders in the process. The other benefit is that for an educational system to maximize its potential, it must be a system that is grounded in healthy, mutual, and respectful relationships. We have had long-term educators in my town meet their school committee members for the first time through this process. The importance of knowing each other, of working together collegially and cooperatively, models for our students in our community the expectations of behavior that is about providing the best educational experience for all of our students. And while our dialogue has not always been on the same page, it has always been respectful and centered on maximizing the educational experience of students in our schools. We have been deliberate in our intent that the contract is about the students in our community. The last item for conversation that I'd like to discuss tonight is open bargaining has afforded us a level of transparency that is vital in the democratic process. Prior to this experience, closed bargaining would enhance opportunities for false narratives, opportunities for others to manipulate the us versus them mentality, and it provided opportunities to increase oppositional behavior and create divisions between the stakeholders who really need to be working together. By engaging in a process that is out in the open, a process that involves all of the stakeholders, it negated traditional bargaining strategies and it redirected our focus where it needed to be, on the schools our students deserve.
Thank you. Jamie Rinaldi.
Is it okay if we make a...
Yeah.
I'll do.
All right. Mr. Miller.
Hi. So I'm Bob Miller. I'm the Vice President of Brookline Educators Union. But I'm actually here to read a letter from Lynn Penzar, who's a Vice President of the Newton Teachers Association, and she wanted to be here but couldn't make it. So I'm going to speak in her voice, but I'm not her. My name is Lynn Penzar. I am on the negotiations team, the contract action team, and serve as the second Vice President of the Newton Teachers Association. I am eager to share with you my experience with open bargaining as it has transpired during our negotiation sessions this school year. We meet regularly with the school committee team for contract negotiations. At several meetings this year, our 6-member team was joined by members of the union as we negotiated specific areas of the contract. Each time additional members joined us, they respectfully listened to the proceedings, observed the nature of the collaboration of negotiations, and gave input into the proceedings when their expertise was warranted. To my mind, these were some of the most productive sessions that we had, since experiences were shared directly with the school committee negotiating members, giving them insight into the day-to-day workings and the day-to-day needs of our children and our schools. Member participation allowed all of us sitting at the table to come to a fuller understanding of the issues and what the solutions to those issues may be. No one can explain someone else's work as well as the person themselves. This is the beauty of opening negotiations. There are specifics that matter in each role in a school and school district, and hearing how members tackle these specifics helps to make decisions at the table clearer. In addition to the knowledge that opening bargaining brings to the process of contract negotiations, it also helps community members understand the process of negotiations. Our communities deserve to know and understand what is happening during contract negotiations, and in fact, they can help us come to quicker resolutions by sharing their expertise. Thank you for your time.
Hi, I'm Jamie Rinaldi. I live at 28 Morrison Avenue in Somerville, Massachusetts. I teach at Newton South High School. I'm a history teacher there, and I am the chair of the Newton Teachers Association bargaining team. And I work with Lynn, who you just heard from through Bob, on the negotiation team. And I'm not going to repeat the points that Lynn made, because I think she set them out well, but I wanted to present a case study from within our bargaining, and since we've opened it up outside of the bargaining room, I'm able to talk about what we're talking about in the room. And I think it offers a valuable case study of how opening up bargaining has led to outcomes that have been immensely beneficial for me as someone representing almost 1,800 members, but I think in ways has also been very helpful for the school committee representatives in the room. So one of the first issues that we addressed in bargaining was a move to full day kindergarten, which Newton has not traditionally had. And we asked our kindergarten teachers to join us in the bargaining room that day when we really got it. We had tried to work through it with the school committee. We had gone over some specifics, but we were at odds over certain things. There were some disagreements about how we were implementing certain provisions that had been established during the pilot year, which was last school year. The school committee felt that they were representing things the correct way. We felt we were representing things the correct way. And then finally we asked the kindergarten teachers to come in. And we actually got 2/3 of them. About 20 of the kindergarten teachers showed up. And it was without a doubt, I think all sides agreed at the end. Admittedly, the school committee, I think, at first was a little sheepish. There's suddenly all these people on the other side of the room. I think they feared something political, that it was going to turn into sort of a rally. We've all been at school committee meetings where you pack the room. But instead, each one of these points that were sticking points, where there was a kind of sense that, is this the union position? Is the union holding firm on this for some sort of long-term political agenda? We could turn around and say, you work with young children. You're in the classroom. You've done the pilot. What do you need? What support do you need? And the kindergarten teacher could say, well, this is what we did in the pilot. This is what worked, and this is what I think should be in the contract. And I'll tell you, by the end of that session, we had a tentative agreement on full day K. It streamlined so much of the process. Now, I think it would be disingenuous to say that that's going to be the case for every single exchange. We are also, in Newton, we bargain all 5 contracts at the same time. So they're all part of a single package for our teachers, our admin, paras, our subs, and our technical support staff. We've brought in members from our paraprofessionals. We call them education support professionals in Newton, and those negotiations have not gone smoothly, but I do think that it has really helped clarify for both sides. I'm a classroom teacher. I'm a high school teacher. I'm not a paraprofessional. It's helped me make sure that I'm really clear in representing them at the table, that we're not going to end up in a situation where we have to caucus and then come back and say, well, you know what, we don't have an answer for you. We'll get back to you in 2 weeks. Instead, we can gather these people and say, really, what is the clearest response here? And I think it's helped school committee members to actually hear people's experiences because, with all due respect, not all of you are in the classroom, right? And I don't know if any of you are paraprofessionals. I don't know that, but I'm imagining that often that's not the person on the other side of the table. So it's brought incredible clarity and fluidity for it. I think that, as Deb mentioned, it's brought transparency. I remember when I started teaching, everything at the bargaining table was a secret. You'd have colleagues that were at the bargaining table and they couldn't talk about anything. We now talk freely about it. We've done that for the last 2 bargaining cycles. I don't think in any way that that's created a complication. I think it's only created transparency. Our members feel more engaged and more connected. And I do think that any community deserves a window into how their representatives are representing them at the table. So I have to say, going through this process right now, it's made what has been a very difficult bargaining cycle, and it has been difficult, one that at points has actually worked in, I guess, a collaborative fashion might be the best way to put it. Those moments where we've opened things up, I've actually felt like we've gotten the most done. And I won't name the school committee member's name, but there was one person who has acknowledged such. So I would encourage the Brookline School Committee to strongly entertain open bargaining in their relationship with the Brookline Educators Union. I think it will make the process all the much better. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Jessica. I think you know me from the BEU, and it's really an honor to have folks who we are learning from, and hope you will too. I'm going to underscore in these comments how the bargaining approach that we are seeking, apart from having learned from others, will move us closer to realizing the vision of the school community that you all have pledged to create, one that affirms cultural diversity, is equitable and inclusive. Because diversity work is on the docket, because of the middle school teacher being targeted at Baker with anti-gay graffiti, I'm going to jump in off from that incident. So I ask you to picture this. A harmful message is found on a school wall. The school, every school, has translated its commitment to upholding the dignity of every adult and child by institutionalizing ongoing practicing of reciprocal mutual respect between adults and children and among adults. They do that by scheduling time in the day to create such a culture, making contractual agreements, and commitments to making such practice integral to what our schools are. And a system that has these commitments in place has transparent protocols and time reserved to respond to the experience and insights of all members of the community. In that way, rumors don't fly. There are no students or educators left dangling, fearing for their safety and secure membership in the community, waiting for recognition, waiting for a plan, waiting to be treated with dignity. So the BEU asks that you sit down with us and negotiate the systematic structural conditions that put mutual respect into practice day in and day out in a transparent and consistent way, and not until the next program should take over and displace the latest approach. Negotiating working conditions, scheduling, staffing, workload, evaluation of programming, we see mutual respect and dignity as reflections of the commitment of resources and to fairness in the treatment of one another, not as a measure of individual character. We want a school culture with due process that's rooted in upholding justice for all, that's all children and all adults. We believe that this can create schools that are places of creative expression, courage, joy, discovery. So to close, I ask you to picture a bargaining session in which we are exploring what conditions will get us closer to achieving racial equity, or indeed equity for all of our students. Two BEU teachers of color and I recently met with an administrator who wanted to talk about the district-wide diversity training. One teacher, who has been here longer than most administrators have been or will be, asked, where is the long view and where is the prioritization of time? If he and others committed to racial justice were in the room when we were bargaining, along with silent representatives of the school committee, we will have help in creating transparent contractual commitments that will honor his experience and insight. That's the model of what we need, and that's what our students need. We're asking you to allow us, in and through negotiations, to create this model of community rooted in mutual respect and modeled, as we've learned from these folks, in the room itself. And we think ultimately it will get us to our shared goal for dignity. So thank you.
Thank you. I would ask, is there anyone else who would like to make public comment? But everyone present has. No, it's not true. I'm sorry. Would you like to make public comment? No. All right, so now everyone has been asked. Excuse me. Very well. Moving on, we have Public Schools of Brookline Educational Equity Update.
Dr. Warren is going to lead this presentation for the committee for probably the first 4/5, and I'll step in as I'll step in at various points to speak to and answer questions from the committee of work that Dr. Warren will be describing that actually has predated her tenure, her start date in the Public Schools of Brookline. This presentation is actually tied to, in many ways, the discussion later tonight about Warrant Article 26. And so what I want to say is that there's a lot that is happening, and as you can see, if you go through the flow of the bubbles, from establishing Dr. Warrenham's office to professional development work in the staff to diversity work, and Dr. Warren will be speaking to the work that Lisa Richardson has been leading for nearly 2 years now, and some of the specific outcomes of that work, to community outreach and work with student groups. And so this presentation is not directly tied to warrant Article 26, but likely is a presentation that in the discussion and in the recommendation that you'll see later this evening that I have brought forth for you to consider as a possible resolution. You'll see a lot of this information in that recommendation. So I hope that sort of frames where we are. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Warnham. I'm going to stay over here so that I can quickly answer any questions that may come up.
Thank you. Thank you for having me this evening. As Andrew explained, that the first thing we talked about was establishing the position and the office. And I'm going to click through there. And so there was a very comprehensive job description. I believe you have it at your tables. But the overarching goal really to help Brookline Public Schools to become more equitable at every facet is really what it boils down to. So first you had to hire a senior director of educational equity, and there I am. I come to you with 19 years of public school experience. I'm a collaborative leader that knows how to create infrastructures, processes, and build community. I specialize in training and supporting educators on all levels, understanding cultural proficiency, and a framework that develops strategies to help them defeat bias in their teaching and learning. My personal professional philosophy, it is my mission as a leader to help educators recognize where bias and learning intersect and to eradicate all forms of bias and racism in the classroom. It is my life's work to relentlessly pursue this goal, and in so doing, I truly believe that the beauty and magic teaching and learning can be experienced by both students and leaders. That's why I get up and come here every day. Once I got the position and began here, the first thing I did was to begin entry interviews. I interviewed all PSB senior leaders and senior directors, and then began to develop relationships and interview community organizations. I'm now on to a deeper level within the district. I asked everyone the same 8 questions, and 2 of those questions, really the meat of the entry interview, was to how did they find equity? And then also, what is preventing Brookline Public Schools from achieving educational equity? It was important to hear that and to understand that from multiple perspectives within the district. As Andrew said, there are really 3 major pieces that I feel that my role has allowed me to work in conjunction with already established events that are happening here within the district. The first one is professional development. So I designed and facilitated a cultural proficiency course for the public school leaders. And that course is based on 5 major principles. The first one, becoming a culturally proficient leader, is you have to be self-reflective. You cannot do this work without first doing some self-examination, understanding that you yourself are a cultural being and that shapes the way you view and evaluate others. And so we spend time there. One of the most requested questions I get are, just tell me what to do. And you can't. You can't just tell. There's not a formula. You have to spend some time doing that hard work. The other thing the other tenet is to study your students and your staff. You have to understand who they are, what they bring. I do think that I believe in James Comer's philosophy that all teaching is relational. And we have to help teachers build an authentic relationship. The more authentic that relationship is, I believe the deeper learning that can come from that. The other thing is the ability and willingness to have difficult conversations. So ability implies that there is some learning that has to happen, that is about skill building. And we need to make sure that we are providing our educators with as much professional development and arming them with as many skills and strategies of how to have those difficult conversations. And I use several theories to do that. The last 2, the next is really articulating a vision. And it's been my experience that districts across the Commonwealth forget this step. That we all want to be culturally proficient. We all know what to do, how to do right. But we forget the step is articulating a vision, that this is who we are and how we're going to get there is really important for leaders to say. The middle bubble says maintaining the 5 essential elements. And that is a framework, right? It's a framework to help leaders normalize their practice. How will this become fold into your everyday practice and make you a better practitioner. And so that course, as you would see, all of the PSB leaders, the senior leaders, all principals and senior directors are 18 hours into this course. We have 2 more full days to complete the course. And I think that is going fairly well. The next round of CP training is that we have to begin to train vice principals and curriculum coordinators. I've divided them into 3 different cohorts with a maximum of 23 participants. You want those groups to be relatively small so that we can spend time answering questions and having as much talk time as possible for folks in that. And so we'll have 3 different cohorts. And the goal is to hopefully get that done through May and June. Professional development has also required us to begin to do work on difficult conversations. Since I've been in Brookline, the most requested workshop I've been asked are, how do we do this? How do we have that conversation? And that's come from both parents and educators. And so on April 3rd, on April 3rd, we had extended day, all of the extended day staff. We did, myself and Principal Talukdar did a workshop with all of the extended day staff on how do you have difficult conversations, how do you talk to younger kids around race and racism. Subsequently, we also did a workshop on raising race-conscious children. I'm scheduled to train the Brookline High School special education staff on cultural proficiency, just defining what it is. So it's an introduction into the framework and beginning to develop some skills for them, and that will happen on April 30th. There are also, which is really exciting as a new person to the district, a new senior leader looking specifically at equity, really exciting to know that there are school-based diversity work groups. And so once a month, I've been meeting with Pierce teachers, and their group is called PEAT, and that stands for Pierce Equity Action Team. And so monthly, we plan a meeting that's open to all Pierce educators once a month, and we'll talk about a theory, and then we'll break that down and practice strategies in that time, and teachers stay after to do that. DICE is actually it stands for Diversity, Inclusion, Community, and Equity, and it is a parent group along with teachers. And so that is every school has their own structure for how this works, but that group is out of Lawrence, and I'm working with them because they are establishing a community building event, and they're going to build a quilt together with a theme. And the teachers are supporting that with books in their with classroom readings as well. One Heath is a group of teachers and parents as well, and we meet early mornings to talk about to plan for monthly discussions that are open to the entire community. And so last month we presented on white privilege. The month before that we presented on race consciousness, and that was in Asa and I co-facilitated that meeting, and we have 2 more this year as well. Please.
Larger community, is that larger for the Heath community, or it's open to the entire community?
It's been publicized to the Heath community, but we haven't turned anyone away. Others have come. The Coolidge Corner School has an equity team as well that I'm beginning to work with. So far, I did work with the students in the naming that are on the name committee and train them on difficult conversations before they entered into the conversations about picking their the folks that they wanted to name the school after. And currently I'm working with other schools to develop their school-based equity teams. And that may be parents and teachers or just teachers. Pete also, although Pete is just teachers, Pierce also has a parent equity team. So they have 2 different teams. They come together, they have come together once this year and plan to come together more often, but the structure depends on each school deciding on how to make that happen. And we've begun conversations at Baker to do that and at Runkle as well. And so we're in the process of making those things happen. And so that's professional development. The next thing that we really have to concentrate, the overarching theme that we have to concentrate on, is diversifying staff. And as Andrew stated, I've been working along with the efforts that Lisa Richardson has already begun here. The difficulty with diversifying staff is that districts, in my experience, districts begin to diversify their staff. They have the right intent, but they pick one bubble and they concentrate on that, and you will only get a certain level of success unless you are always considering hiring, recruitment, and retention. You have to concentrate on those three bubbles equally or simultaneously, or you're really only going to make a certain amount of progress. And so that's our effort. So when we look at hiring, there are several different conferences that myself, Lisa, Nicole Gittens, the Deputy Superintendent of Teaching and Learning, and Janae at the high school have attended this year to help to make sure that we are being conscious of who we're hiring and how to go about hiring. I find this interesting, and I wanted to share this data with you, that Brookline has the highest percentage of educators of color compared to any comparable district. That's a good sign. That's a good thing for us. There are 18% of Unit A folks are of color, 39% of paraprofessionals are of color, and overall 20% of our staff are of color. 4 out of 6 direct reports to the superintendent are women of color. That's a big deal. I have to say that for me, accepting this position was one of the selling points for me was this is my first time in my professional career to work with other women of color at the senior level. That's a positive statement we should celebrate. In this school year, 2018-2019, 50% of K-8 school principals are of color. That's huge, and we should be proud of that. Next year, I'm sorry.
No. When you get a chance, could
Yes.
you share this slide with us?
Yes.
Or actually the whole set?
Yeah.
The whole thing. Because I don't think we got it.
Okay, I'll have to, it's actually online. I'll convert it and then share it with you.
Okay.
I'll convert it and then share it with Robin, and he'll get it to you. All of the slides there. So this year, yeah, there are 4 principals of color.
So this year there are 4 with Baker. So you have 4 principals of color with a co-principal, but we have more because we have co-principals at both Coolidge Corner and Baker. We have 10 elementary principals total. So the number stays the same, but next year we have 8 elementary school principals, K-8 principals, and 4 of those 8 with our successful hire of Mr. Lewis for Baker means that half of our school leaders are principals of color.
Thank you for that clarification. It's important, and so that's hiring. When we look at recruitment, the biggest, one of our biggest assets is to begin to develop a pipeline for the educators we already have in place. So what we did is we surveyed all of our paraprofessionals of color. 79% of the respondents are interested in career advancement. That's a huge number. 52% have college degrees, and 26% have graduate degrees. But yet 74% need financial support to obtain their license or degree. And 88% of those have not taken the MTELs, and you can't get your license without passing the MTELs. And so in addition to doing the survey and finding this data out, we then held drop-in sessions. Lisa Richardson and I met at 3 different locations at 3 different times, inviting in paraprofessionals to come and talk to us about their journey and what were their biggest questions. And the questions ranged from, this is something I want to do, but I don't know what the first step is. How do I begin? I need a map. Could someone show us how? And so we're going to take that information and develop and further develop our pipeline to help our paraprofessionals become licensed here in our district. So recruitment is a big piece of this. The other piece is affinity gatherings, right? The other piece of the 3 bubbles of diversifying staff is you have to pay attention to retention, because you can get them here, but will they stay? And how do you make them comfortable? And so my intent with developing the affinity groups is to eliminate or reduce the racial isolation that you often feel as a person of color in a predominantly white district, and to build community and shared experiences, a place to share your experiences as well. And so in early March, we had our first gathering of the Asian and Asian American Pacific Islanders gathering, and that was a great success, and we're on to planning the second one. The Latinx first gathering will be on the 22nd. We're looking forward to that. And the affinity group for Black educators will go out tomorrow. And so we're excited about that as well. So that's looking at the three bubbles of diversifying staff. The next thing that I began to look at is community development and community outreach. So as soon as I got here, which was a great welcome, I received a great welcome from Bridge, the Brookline Racial Justice Equity Group. And every 6 weeks, we meet to discuss an issue, to discuss the any issue that they'd like to bring to the table. And so we're continuing that. In our last meeting, we decided that it's now time to take action, right? And so they're interested in trying to figure out how do they move from just becoming a group that is informative to taking action to making change. And so it's exciting to be a part of that group as well. The Town Office of Diversity and Inclusion and I are developing a relationship. We've had several meetings and reaching out, and that's a budding relationship that is coming, and I think we can work in conjunction on several projects. I know that the town office is interested in building a person of color affinity group for the town, which really I think will coincide with the affinity groups that we have here in the district. Parent workshops have also begun to happen. I'm going to back up before that. And the other piece is Parent Advisory Committee. And that was one of the committees that we began to work on as soon as I got here. And so that has been really exciting. I am going to report that we had over 90 applicants. And so we went from expecting 2 people for every K-8 school to 3. We'll now have 3 parent representatives from every K-8 school, 2 from B, and 4 from the high school. And so there was tremendous interest in that. And the charge of this group thus far is to support school leaders in their efforts to create and promote equitable practices, build inclusive school communities, and work towards closing opportunity and achieving equitable outcomes for all students. And so we will meet, actually our first meeting is next Wednesday, and we are going to start to put some meat on that skeleton to figure out what does that look like and how do we do that. I think a very big key, a benefit that we will get as a district is the communication, because I imagine that this group will communicate really closely with not only the PTOs at the schools, but also the diversity equity teams at each school as well. And so we're excited that that is going to take place this year. Parent workshops that have happened, I referenced the Heath monthly series, as well as the Driscoll workshop on raising race-conscious children. We're actually scheduled to do part 2 of that coming up. And Pierce, we will have the P-PEAT is the parent, it's an unfortunate name at this point, but they are excited and they're going to meet. We're going to meet for breakfast and talk about how to talk to kids about racism and continue to work, and then discuss ways for the parent PEAT group and the teacher PEAT group to work together as well. So excited that that's happening as well. That just brings connectivity. But all of this leads to our work with students. I'm happy to report that the district has done great work thus far in that there is now a GSA in every school in the district. And I think it was 3 years ago that wasn't true. But this year we can say that there is a GSA student group in every school, that the ADL, Anti-Defamation League, has trained peer leaders in all of our schools. I was able to attend a part of that when I first got here, and so that is wonderful to see that our students are now trained on how to have those conversations. We're in the first year, this is year 1 into our 3-year plan to bring restorative justice into all of our schools, and so we're making that work. And thanks to the work of Ms. Noel Miller, we've passed a code of conduct that is that helps us to be more equitable. And so really excited about that as well. So there are wonderful things that we are doing to make us not only more equitable, but that join together, right? That there's a process, and that's important. I think that is for us to see that we have to really be active in all of these areas if we're going to move the district as a whole. Any questions you have? Yes.
Thank you for this presentation, Dr. Warnham. I was wondering if you'd like to elaborate on the Baker Forum last night and how that fits in. Ms. Schreiner-Oldham and I attended the forum at Baker yesterday regarding the homophobic vandalism that took place at Baker. Dr. Warnham held a forum yesterday, and I would say about 50 people showed up, and perhaps you want to explain what happened?
The Baker, as you said, the Baker Forum took place last night. The only correction I would make is that the leaders of Baker and myself held that forum. By no means could I have done that without them being present to make that happen. It was also, we also worked in conjunction with the Baker Parent Diversity Committee. And we're going to develop a teacher diversity committee at Baker as well. And really, I think the community just needed to come together to talk about the reality of where they were and how do we move forward. It's important that that conversation, that as a community, we all take ownership of what is it that I can do from my perspective and my seat to be better and help us to be a better community. And we really wanted to focus the conversation in that regard. It was important for folks to understand that that was a painful event that happened in our community. That is an exception and not a rule. And if that is the case, if this is an exception, if that is an outlier kind of activity that has happened on our watch, what are we going to do to make sure that it doesn't happen again? And I do think that people had an opportunity to say, this was hurtful, this was harmful, and I am committed to doing X, Y, and Z. Because from that, we also are in the middle of planning the next forum, which will happen at the end of May, either the 21st or the 22nd. We haven't landed solidly on a date. Please.
First, I just want to say that I thought that the community forum last night at Baker was fabulous and that you did an amazing job helping to facilitate that, and that your presentation and the work that has been done, even in just the short time that you've been here, is phenomenal. And I just look forward to more to come. A question that I receive, and we hear a lot we heard it a little last night, I hear it at the CPAC meetings, and I hear it in the community a lot, is when we're talking about equity, and we're talking about race, and we're talking about diversity, let's a little separate from diversifying staff and things like that. But when we look at these diversity groups within the schools and professional development, are we wanting to address issues like race and I'm not sure the correct terminology, with like the Gay Straight Alliance and groups like that, and also disabilities and special education? Is it all falling under the same umbrella, or how are we thinking about this as we're looking at equity and diversity? And every single time we talk about equity and diversity, are we talking about all of those together, or are they separate conversations? And so if you could talk a little bit about that and your thoughts on it.
The quick answer, but not clear, is yes, is both and, right? I believe my position is the educational equity, which would include everything. In that, I purposely wanted to start with cultural proficiency, with training and cultural proficiency, because the framework of that allows us to address any ism. Because a microaggression, although I may get a sting of a racial microaggression, let's say something is said, that affects me as a African American woman. At the same time, I'm still a woman, and that intersectionality of my identity is too complex to say this hurts more than that. And I also think that is not a healthy conversation. I think the tool is, and that's again why I started with cultural proficiency, because the tool is, if we can teach you to dismantle one, you learn how to dismantle all. And I really believe that. And so there are times, though, that we have to specialize the conversation. Like last night at Baker needed to be a specialized conversation on homophobia, because that's where the direct attack came from. At the same time, I truly believe, for example, the leaders that are going through the cultural proficiency course have gained skills that will help them in dealing with a homophobic incident that could happen or that did happen. And so it's a both and for me, if that's helpful. Okay, good. Yes, please.
Thank you again for this. You've done a lot, I have to say, in a short period of time. So how do we offer help to our staff, our teachers, who are really trying to be thoughtful about the curriculum and what we offer, however as teachers have told us in the past, it's actually quite scary to talk about some of these issues. And not because they don't want to,
Yes.
but because it's uncomfortable, or they're afraid they might
Yes.
offend somebody, or they themselves might be offended. And so how do we make that happen in kind of a timely fashion? So there's some sense of urgency around this. I think we had a conversation in one of the bridge meetings where a teacher was teaching Huck Finn or something, and there were some questionable conversations, and yet I'm not sure it was a malintent, but I'm not sure that the students were comfortable, some of them. And so how do we help move that along in some sense of urgency?
I really have 3 responses, and I'm going to try to be as brief as possible. The first one is, when there's pain, the first thing you have to do is stop, right? We just have to stop. If we know that teaching Huck Finn and we made this mistake and we're causing harm that makes it unsafe for a child to learn, we have to stop, get better, and then start. The getting better piece is the scary part. I do understand and have had teachers say all the time that this is scary and it's a lot. You're asking me to do. And so that's why we have to make sure that we are providing our teachers with top-notch professional development and that we're there to help them. When a teacher says to me, I get it and I want to do something different, but this is intimidating, or I'm afraid of the conversation, my next question often is, what are you doing to overcome the fear? It's not that I don't want you to practice without the fear, because that's unreasonable, but it's not okay for you to be fearful and not be better, because the responsibility of making it safe for that kid in the classroom requires you to lean into that fear, and it requires us as leaders in the district to provide the learning they need to address that fear, and to provide the tangible strategies. And that's why I think theory has its place, but it has to be actionable, right? I want a teacher to leave the conversation with, here's one thing you can do differently tomorrow, and I need you to try that. And so some of this is stop and reflect, do some self-reflection, right? Where am I committing aggressions, and what is my own implicit bias? Then, and examine where there are some ouch moments that are making the classroom unsafe for learning. And then we have got to provide them some professional development that is helpful and actionable for them as well. It's hard because, on one hand, we want it fixed tomorrow. And it can be, but it's a small, we have to be methodical about this. We have to have a plan and provide the service for them. Yes, please.
So I'd also like to add that I think that this is one area of our work where society at large expects us to be perfect, and that's an unreasonable expectation. And so as one of the important things about the principals and directors starting with this training is that if we are expecting people to take risks and dive into difficult conversations, to address when something happens like you described and discuss it with the class, many times it will go really well and sometimes it won't. And when it doesn't go well, our school leaders need to be well positioned to support the educators in the conversation that happens, because there will be hurt and there will be upset. And so it's incumbent upon us as educational leaders to be there, not just in principle, but in actual moments to support people who are engaging in this deeply important and very hard work when they're not perfect, because none of us are perfect. And I think I would say that there's also the charge for, as elected leaders of town, when having conversations, to do the same. I think it's fair to say that every one of you wants us to do this work, and there are times where we won't be perfect, and when that happens and somebody has a question, direct them to the school principal. Please talk to the school principal, and they will help facilitate an understanding of what happened. And I can actually think of, I will not give any specifics, but I can think of multiple concrete examples right here in this moment where something was tried, it didn't go so well, someone or some people were very upset, And in sitting down and the principal facilitating the conversation and listening, everyone listening to one another, understanding both feelings and what people were trying to do, what the intent was, people acknowledging, my intent was this, I understand that the harm was this, that in all of those instances, the ones that popped into my head in this moment, it got to a resolution, and the relationships in those smaller parts of our community ended up stronger. And so I think it's important that while the training is happening, while work is happening, it is a long process. And for all of us to go into this saying we are not going to be perfect, and we're going to work our hardest, and sometimes our best intent will have impact that we didn't anticipate. And then how do we recover from that? How do we acknowledge it? And the importance of training. One of the questions I anticipated was, do you have enough time in May and June to train the 68 people, the 68 vice principals and program directors and curriculum coordinators that were listed? And it's ambitious. And Dr. Warnham and I are going in eyes wide open that we may not accomplish finishing by the end of this year, but we will have started and can finish in the fall, because we want all of our educational leaders to have the opportunity to begin the training to support anyone in their schools, anyone in our entire organization who tries and is working really hard at this and needs support because what they thought would happen or what they planned for so well took a different turn that was unanticipated. So there's a lot of work on training, but there's a lot of work that all of us can do to make sure that people do understand that we're not perfect, and we're all working really hard to do what's right. And so I think that's to continue the dialogue, to continue the push people to ask questions in person and listen to resolve. I think it will actually accelerate when people feeling safe in doing this, and when people feel safe, they're willing to try more and learn more, and you start seeing that that very important snowball effect.
Absolutely. I think Mr. Glover had a question. Do you have a question? I'm sorry, Mr. Perlman.
I'm hearing a lot of discussion about professional development and training and the relational aspect of this, both the importance of teachers and educators cultivating relationships with students and also their colleagues. My one concern with that is to make sure that we actually have enough time and the resources in place to do all of this properly. And that likely will necessitate certain trade-offs, perhaps in other areas. I'm just wondering if any, I assume some thoughts already been given as to how we can achieve that.
Yes.
So you just, as with Ms. Federspiel's question, Mr. Perlman, you're spot on. There are a lot of demands, and we have to start making decisions about what is our priority. And understanding that we can't accomplish everything in 1 year, and we can't accomplish everything in 3 years. And there's certain things that we have to be very clear about, that it's not something that will happen in the next 2 years, because this is what we're focusing on. This is what we're focusing our time on. And there are a lot of people that are working on developing a framework for that to bring to the committee, to bring for vetting across our schools. So I don't want to preview that too early, because there's a lot of work happening, but it will necessitate trade-offs, because time is like truly the one thing that's finite, right? Money is hard, right? It's always hard to get more money, and sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. We can't get more time, right? So we have to figure out what is a reasonable amount of time. What is the time we have available, and then what's reasonable to accomplish? So from my perspective, we have this, right? This work that Dr. Warnham described to you, that there is strong consensus across the district as being really important. This has to be a high priority. We are also bringing, through Math Program Review, a new math curriculum online over the next couple years. We have to prioritize the appropriate supports and time for training in that. And that's going to really then limit most anything else we can do for the next couple years, and we have to be very explicit about that. And so that's in process, and the committee can and should expect to hear in upcoming meetings what I believe, starting at curriculum, an upcoming curriculum meeting, what some of those ideas are for being very clear and specific, and then sticking with it, right? Because new things crop up, and say, no, what we committed to was this. This is what we're training on. So that was a really long answer to your question, but it's a question that I think is so important, because if we don't dedicate the time and the resources, we're not going to get the outcomes that we want.
Yes.
I will just add to that we actually today in this very room we were talking about PD coordination, right? How can we fit things in, and where, and what takes priority, and should we have a 3-year plan? It's not an easy map, but it's one that we are beginning to develop.
So I have a question. You had mentioned in there that you had spent the first, I don't know how long, month or so, talking with people. And I'm wondering, what are some of the takeaways that you have from those conversations that you might be willing to share with us?
I think the first one that really kind of cemented for me that there is no such thing as buyer's remorse when you start a new job and you kind of get a little of that. I really didn't have any after those interviews, because people were dedicated. People in Brookline are dedicated and smart, like that, without a doubt. And if I can choose to be anywhere, I want to be in a room where folks are smarter than me. And I felt like I found that. And so that, for me, feels good. And that was one of the first things I learned. The other thing, more specifically to the questions that I asked, were that everyone was willing to answer, how do they define equity? We all didn't say the same thing, but to me, that talks to intentionality, that we all have the intent to move us to be more equitable. Overall, I think most folks understand the difference between equality and equity. They are two very different things, and folks were able to answer that and discuss it in that way. I think with some refinement and some, again, constructive steps, being methodical, I do think we can get there overall.
Thank you.
So normally I hate repeating things because it irritates my colleagues, but I'm just so impressed at how much you have accomplished in such a short period of time. Just has to be said, so regardless of whether I irritate people. And we've been talking about this at school committee workshops for years. We've been talking. Okay. I think the one thing that I really appreciate about this is that you've really zeroed in on some incredibly important and high priority areas, and have gotten, the good news is there's a hunger for some traction there, and so, when you press on the gas pedal, the car goes, and that's incredible, as evidenced by the fact that there are so many bright lights that you're trying to pull together into kind of a coherent framework. So I think that's the great part, and if I had to pick anything, I would pick that to have focused on first. I think the other thing, though, that's in my mind is that, like, the where are we going with this? What does success look like question? I think sometimes the race work in particular can feel hard and abstract and not really clear about, I'm going to all these trainings, and so now some light bulbs went off, but am I done? Did I check my box? Like, how do we know when we see it? And I feel like we do a great job on this with classrooms. Like when you look at when you say, here's, when I walk into a classroom, what do I want to be seeing? What does engaged student learning look like? There's a lot of agreement on whether a student looks engaged, and you can, look at their work and artifacts, whatever. I'm not sure we have that for the race and equity work of just, what does it look like when it's working well? And some of them I think are probably easier than others. So for example, if we were to do a curriculum audit of our Indigenous Peoples Day work, there's been so much that's been done on that. You can kind of look at that and say, okay, here are all the pieces we've put in place. But on something like, do we have a norm that says, as I look across every 7th grade book list in the district, that they're not going to be all white people. They're not going to be all, like, that's an indicator. Or another indicator would be whether, certainly that some of these numbers, but even things like, do teachers, educators report, more willingness to kind of lean in to these uncomfortable situations versus pull back because of fear? Do students feel that all of their educators have high expectations of all? Are we seeing these numbers translate into special ed referrals or, disciplinary referrals, suspension rates, all the things we've talked about in other meetings. So it feels to me like if you kind of look at the student aspect, the educator aspect, climate and culture, policies, practices, budget, sort of facilities, community engagement, like each one of those has a set of things that we would say, yeah, that looks closer to goal, further from goal. And again, not all of it's quantitative, not all of it's quantitative, but there's just this vision of here are the kinds of things we would be seeing. And I guess I'm just feeling that in the absence of some of those things, like really specific things, it might be hard for some folks to say, all this is great, and I can't think of a single thing I wouldn't do on here. Sure. I'm just trying to kind of help people put it in sort of a bigger framework of where are we going with this. So I don't know if there's any time maybe this summer or at some other point to kind of pull that together, but I think that might really help people.
I agree with you. And I think if I had to add another bubble, it would be next steps, right? But I hesitate only in that I don't think we're quite there yet. Because I think for me that the bottom right bubble of articulating vision, we haven't named it quite yet. And I think that is where we are stuck. I think, not stuck, we're just not there yet. And we're getting there. I think that there are evidence within our curriculum of windows and mirrors. I think you can see clearly diversity, meaning everyone is here. There's a sense of belonging that folks are having, that folks experience here. But equity really means changing the infrastructure. And we're not quite there yet, but we've got to have a place to define that. And that's what we're starting to do. I actually think that's the next step.
Just how does that work happen? I mean, maybe just explain a little bit about how you see that piece rolling out so that we can kind of pull back and say, if we're looking like an equitable district, here's what will be going on, and these are the places we're working on now, and these are the ones we'll get to later, and but just some way for us to kind of think about it.
And I think to your question, I think the question of like in the summer, right? What in so many ways is powerful is we have work that was started, and as I think you said it, Ms. Dickoff, a lot of bright lights, and Dr. Warnham has really been harnessing all of those and accelerating in certain areas. And to Dr. Warnham's point of the bubble of next steps, I think that the next steps answer both the how of what Dr. Warnham just described about making sure that when we articulate the vision, we're all articulating the sort of the same, the vision is, we have the same vision, right? It's not exactly, the same picture, but we all understand where we're collectively headed, and how are we defining success? And I think that comes in the next steps. And so I think specifically to your question, is that something that comes in the next couple months and over the summer? Yes.
And I think we're almost there. Yes, Jennifer.
And just in thinking about how we define success for this, I was just thinking about what that looks like success for students in this conversation. And I know there was a student group bubble at the beginning, and I was wondering what work is happening or has happened or will be happening around student input into, I was thinking specifically around connectedness and how important connectedness to school community is an impact on student learning and engagement. And so if someone could refresh me on what we've done or where we're at and what our plans are for that in many different areas of equity.
So the slides, I'm not going to advance it because this is a very advanced presentation that Dr. Warnham built, and I'm not sure which bubbles will come up or disappear. Those were some examples of student groups, and I think that Dr. Warnham and I wanted to highlight, for example, the GSAs, because GSAs are not something that are necessarily easy in a lot of communities to bring when you have elementary schools. In middle schools, they are becoming more and more common across the Commonwealth. And so from 3 years ago, I believe we had 2, maybe 3 GSAs to now 8. And in many schools, we have 2 groups. We'll have a 5-6 group and a 7-8 group. That is a huge step forward. The ADL training, we have over 180 peer leaders who've been trained. Now, some of them are graduating this year, so that number will go down, and we're continuing to train because we've built in annually the money in the budget to continue training peer leaders. And so that was one that was highlighted. One thing that we didn't include was scholars, young scholars in our elementary schools that Kathleen Hubbard and Dr. Lazama worked with many others to bring to our elementary schools to build a sense of connectedness. And so, one of the question you asked is, how do we know? And I think that's tied to Ms. Ditkoff's question of like, what's the information we want to collect, both qualitative and quantitative? How do we get information from students about their connectedness to school? How are they feeling? And how can we get it at a high level? A student survey is a great way to get that at a high level for a lot of students. And how do you get much more specific information from a focus group of students where you can interview and you can go much deeper so that you can combine the two? And I think some combination, I think our next step should be some combination of both of those, so that we're able to have at least some beginning information about how students are reporting their own connectedness.
Sure.
And I guess, just in thinking out loud, it would be nice to sort of get that information, and then as we continue our work, wrap back around to that and sort of see if part of that success is measured in the change in student connectedness over time. So that would just be nice to have too.
So about 10 years ago, Ron Ferguson did a study, the tripod study here in Brookline. And I'm not sure if he's still doing it or not, or if there's something like that. But it would be interesting if, speaking to what you're saying, to compare. If we were to be able to do the same sort of study, have things changed? Are they better? Are they worse? But especially after doing some of this work.
I'm happy to look at specifically at the methodology of that study. I obviously read it. But didn't look at it from the lens of like, could we replicate it at some level? So I'm happy to do that. Come back to the committee to say like, I don't believe that. I actually don't know what the tripod project is still doing and what they're not.
Yeah, I have no idea, but I just remembered as we were talking about looking for things. I think it's important to know where we were too. And
there could be some really important qualitative questions that they ask that maybe the quantitative things don't make sense, or maybe they do, but there could be a lot of really good qualitative questions that we would want to continue or ask again a decade on. So happy to I will pull the report out again, and I'm happy to review it and come back to the committee with some thoughts on that.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Am I turning this off, Robin? Are there other presentations on here? Okay.
So what we're moving into is the discussions of the warrant articles that we had hearings on, and I think we'll start with warrant article 26. Well, Khalees is with us. You don't have to stay at the microphone, but stay close. And I think we'll also start with the superintendent. So is that, which we move to warrant article 26 next?
So what? So I think the approach that we have that I'm bringing to you for the warrant articles is I have some draft language for the committee to consider relative, and obviously there's an assumption made in this draft language based on the prior school committee meeting. So just making sure we still have quorum. What should we do? So relative to warrant article 26 and the conversation, based on the conversation that was had 2 weeks ago, I sort of took a leap that the school committee supports the spirit of warrant article 26. And so what the language here is that the school committee supports the spirit of warrant article 26, a resolution pertaining to the engagement of race and equity review consultant. We believe the spirit of warrant article 26 is consistent with the public schools of Brookline's long-established core values of respect for human differences, educational equity, and high achievement for all. The Brookline School Committee values the intent of Warrant Article 26 to provide support to town departments to identify specific equity goals. The school committee sees alignment between the intent of the warrant article and the public schools of Brookline's ongoing work to address equity and of access and outcomes for all students, much of which is summarized below. And in the text below, you have the summary of Dr. Warner's presentation. I was just asking Mr. Lummis a question. There's a few numbers on the tables that we need to adjust so that they are reflective of the numbers in Dr. Warner's presentation, which are accurate. So just as you look at that, know that if you endorse this warrant article, we will update that text before. If you endorse this endorsement that I brought before you, we will correct those numbers before any submission to the combined report happens, and specifically some of the numbers in the table on the second page. So I would leave it, I guess, to the committee for a discussion of what you would like to do, and certainly can edit this statement. This is a starting point, and I'm hopeful that it's helpful, more helpful than having to craft a statement at the table.
Yes, thank you. So let's take the sort of top language, and if anybody has any thoughts or comments on this kind of recommendation to town meeting regarding the warrant article, and then we can take up the background, or in reverse if people feel like the background needs to be discussed. But I'm not sure. I mean, I want to discuss the background, but in terms of what we're the sort of words of the kind of words of the committee are the first three short paragraphs. Any thoughts or well, let's
Okay,
yeah.
I just ask a clarifying. In the warrant article, when it says equity goals across all town departments,
That's not us.
that's not us, right?
Correct.
That's what I was.
Right, so and it's the same with all three of these warrant articles.
Okay.
Is that in sort of respecting the autonomy of our budget, if you will, they each one, electrification of the fleet, the menstrual hygiene products, and the equity audit, they say, and we sort of hope the schools will do something similar. And so we're sort of saying,
So we will. This is what we would do. That's similar.
Well, I might suggest, so Ms. Dickoff in the prior discussion asked if equity goals would, benchmarks and based on those benchmarks, goals would be developed. And so I might suggest to the committee that relative to a statement, you may want to say, it is the expectation of the committee that the school department or the schools would in a similar fashion develop goals and outcomes in the spirit of the town's warrant article, because it is work that we're already doing, and it's really important work, and I think it brings us in many ways in alignment with the town departments that will be doing this work should the warrant article pass. So that's just a thought for the committee to consider.
I think if we have the ability to make additions to it, one of the slides that I thought was very powerful was the one about directly.
what I wanted to do was
Just the warrant language?
we'll get to all of this.
Oh, okay.
But what I wanted to, I think the top is sort of, I mean, at least the way this is kind of set up is that this is the sort of word, this is the speech of the school committee to town meeting at the top. This is our recommendation to town meeting and what we are saying, and then the background is kind of what's been developed by staff as a update on what's happening in the schools on all these topics, and I have comments on that as well on the background content. And so Superintendent Bott just maybe suggested we might consider a fourth paragraph that said that I didn't write down your word, the sort of that, but that it's our expectation that as this work progresses, metrics and benchmarks will continue to be refined and reported against something.
Our work.
In our work, right.
Just make it clear that we're not
Yeah,
expecting benchmarks from the town.
You can maybe add that onto the third paragraph.
Right, so it says, the school committee sees alignment between the intent of the warrant article of Public Schools of Brookline, ongoing work to address equity and access, and outcomes for all students, much of which is summarized below, as this work of the work in our schools of the PSB progresses. It is the school committee's expectations that what are you going to produce? Benchmarks and benchmarks and metrics. I don't know. I mean, benchmarks, metrics, benchmarks, and
Is it the school
and
committee's
progress reports, or whatever.
Right. It's the school committee's expectation that the school department. Give me 1 second. The school department will set regular goals, benchmarks for those goals, and report regularly on progress towards achieving those goals.
Great.
Okay.
So as a sort of a framework, we can come back to this when we vote something, but are we happy with that as a preamble, cover?
I mean, it actually, I think, suggests that the school department's doing this already. We're kind of ahead of the rest of the town.
Well, that's what we think.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to tell them, and they can take whatever perception they want. But yeah, right. I mean, not that we're where we want to be. The work is long, right? Okay, so let's move on to the sort of update, which again is the rest of this page and the following page, which is, a sort of another version of Dr. Warnham's presentation that she's just made, a PowerPoint that just was made to us. And Ms. Reiner-Oldham, you were making a suggestion.
I just thought it would be useful to incorporate a little more of the data where we have comparable districts and educators of color, and specifically mention that we now have, or we, for the next coming year, will have 50% of principals who are minority.
Yeah, right. So
those two, and then the 4 of 6.
Right. No. So that's more specific. But I think that Superintendent Bott already sort of said that the tables will get updated. That content information that's currently in the tables will be made the same as what's.
Well, I think what I'm hearing is to explicitly state those bullet points, which are embedded in the larger data. So explicitly state that. Okay.
Right. Oh. So I was as we were going as Dr. Warnham was presenting and going through all of the work that she's been, the impressive work that she's been doing since she got here and laying out going forward, and all of the, centered in the professional development and everything that we just heard, what kept coming to my mind was some of the work and experiences that have been happening in the district and that you've brought to us over the past few years, and I, that some of those histories are grounding in immediacy for town meeting members to kind of understand the life in the schools and the experience in the schools, and what's been happening in the schools. I mean, we know that on a periodic basis we have graffiti events or video, racist videos or, this kind, and then we have responses. And some of the responses are this sort of movement into restorative practice that has been implemented, hasn't gotten that, I mean, we've only been doing it a little bit in some isolated incidents, but now we're doing all the training. But there's a sort of, the restorative circle that happened at the high school in relation to the racist videos was a very powerful story that was brought to school committee. And the story about the taking a close look at the disparate recommendations for ninth grade honors versus standard placement, and once those measures were were looked at, and the disparities that weren't just came to light, the actions that were taken of bringing that information back to all of the 8th grade teams that were making the recommendations, and the outcomes or the progress that's been made, and even in the leveled learning that's going to be piloted in 9th grade next year, that's all part of that ongoing work that's in the student experience. I also was thinking about, particularly at the high school, what happens with the entire community and very much with our students. So we have I don't know what they're called, the days of reflection, the multiple days where the students come together, with the whole community comes together to talk about climate and culture and deal with gender issues and race issues. And I'm not sure town meeting members know that's happened, right? They don't know what's happening in our schools. So, around our community actually having these difficult conversations. We are having these difficult conversations, again, in certain ways that would be worth reporting. And then there's just when the Minority Student Achievement Network representatives come and talk to us, and the work that they're doing, and how just like with the recommendations for 9th grade placement, when the information of the suspension data and how disparate it was for vulnerable populations, for students of color, for students with IEPs, and how that information led to change practice. Because what's being asked for on the town side, I think, is examination and then looking for ways to change practice. And we've been, you've been changing practice in ways that are really good demonstrations of the direction where we want to go. And time is short in terms of speaking to town meeting on this, right? We could, if we want to get it in the combined reports, we need to vote something tonight. If there is if we have another school committee meeting before the supplemental reports go out. So I don't.
Even moving the date.
I don't know about moving the date. But
you also could.
I don't know about moving the date. I don't think we did. Yeah.
You also, I think, in previous years had voted based on, because it wasn't the vote language seems with that additional paragraph.
If you want to take on revising the
certainly can revise
the background
it, and then
memo.
We could revise the background memo, and I think in previous years the committee voted to deputize the chair and vice chair to approve it with these. I've taken notes on all of this in the background memo, so we can.
There's scholars,
Yeah.
and there's the movement into the elementary schools with young scholars. There's the calculus project and moving into the elementary schools with the calculus project moving into the elementary schools. I mean, there's so much hard work that's being done, and and then you look at the impact, like where we are in terms of the achievement and opportunity gaps, and how we're not closing them, and we know how much more work we have to do. But Well, I think that would be fine with me if the committee thinks that we do want to provide this kind of actual, like, this is the work that we're doing, which is just, and again, Dr. Wernham's only been here since November, and so it's not her work, so it's not in her report of her plans going forward, but it is part of what the hard work that's being done by our educators and our students.
Happy to work on adding all of that tomorrow and Monday and getting it back to, again, if it's the will of the committee, to the chair and vice chair to approve before it were to go into the combined report.
The only other thing I had a note on were the curricula. So Ms. Dickoff talked about the Indigenous Peoples curricula. We've got Hidden Brookline. I don't know if they're, I mean, we don't need to put everything in here, so however it give a shape. Well, there's also high school courses on race too, right?
Race reels.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's courses, right? Yeah. So, what about the Coolidge Corner School renaming process? I mean, that and the vote that town meeting. I mean, town meeting voted for it. We recommended unanimously that they vote for it, but they took that action in some sense, and we're carrying out their directive back to us.
I will say relative to the I'm not sure that the Coolidge Corner renaming belongs in here. I do think a powerful moments relative to the Coolidge Corner renaming has been as the students have done presentations. The universally the response as residents have spoken with students, have asked students questions, is being really impressed with not only the level of information that students have about the person that they're nominating, but their ability to answer questions, and sometimes hard questions. Well, what about JFK? And the ability of students to articulate the answers. And I'm not surprised. I don't think any of you are surprised. But I think that learning of the power of our youth and what is so important about the way that our educators support our youth and in this work of public education. I think the success of our students in being leaders in the conversation around 15 people, many of whom may not have been known to residents of town, has been I think hugely impactful. So I think that the Coolidge Corner renaming process is important in so many levels, and I'm not sure, happy to include it here if that's what the committee wants. I'm not sure it belongs here, but I could be convinced otherwise.
I mean, it occurs to me that the initial frame of that conversation, which was brought to us by town, through us to town meeting and then back to us to town meeting, in which a community conversation, and very much a conversation at Coolidge Corner School, has been engaged, actively engaged by the entire community, precipitated by this acceptance and surfacing of the name of a slaveholder associated with the building, and that we as a community and as a school community, among everything else that we're doing, have also been talking about that this year, as opposed to talking about the names that are coming. I wouldn't talk about the names that are coming forward, but just that this conversation is in front of us and we are in it, maybe. Yeah, Mr. Perlman.
I think another way that we could approach a similar point, including what you just mentioned, would be, again, the Baker Forum last night. There were some students who participated, and one of them in particular, his remarks were extremely insightful. I think that they spoke very well for the quality of our public education here, the level of engagement, level of discourse. So perhaps including a mention that some of the work that Dr. Warnham has been engaging in, it actually does include our students, and so they are actively involved. Yes.
Great.
Also, the leadership that's being exhibited by our students. Two nights ago, on the high school student, Vishni, I'm not sure, I don't know her last name, but spoke about her club and the curriculum that the sort of parallel Google Doc alternative voices curriculum that that their club has been developing with the with the social studies teachers and other clubs, including in
No, it's very different, and it's happy to bring more details, but it's a different, really powerful student leadership, and Vishni and I are working to schedule an opportunity for her and her team to train our K principals. So sort of another. I hadn't shared that with Mr. Pollack, but sort of another powerful opportunity for our young adults.
Right. There was a panel. The Ayanna Presley spoke, and then after that, there was a panel on race conversations at KI, and there was a student amongst all of the other panelists. It was an interesting event. Okay, so we have language. Does someone want to move it?
I did.
Oh, you did. Is there a second? Anyone? Do we have a second? Thank you. Further discussion. And this is, I think, this is voting the language with the understanding that the metrics and be updated, and some of the other language will be developed, and in the background memo will be expanded and then brought back to the chair and vice chair, and it'll go out in the combined reports. Yes?
Before the committee votes, can I just read the fourth paragraph for the school committee statement? Or continue to the third paragraph. The school committee expects, as the work of the PSB progresses, as the work of the PSB progresses, it is the school committee's expectation that the school department will set regular goals, benchmarks for those goals, and report regularly on progress towards achieving said goals.
All right. On the motion. All in favor? You can invite her back. Oh, she's not too far away. Okay, let's move on to either of the other warrant articles.
Let's do the menstrual products warrant article.
Excellent, yes.
There's a number of people here to speak to the committee and answer questions. What I will do, if I could get let me get from the this is warrant article 20. So our Director of Nursing and Clinical Services, Tricia Laham, is here to answer questions that the committee may have relative to this warrant article, as well as one of our student petitioners. So thank you for coming again tonight. I'll start with the draft language. Again, this is draft language for the school committee to consider and potentially work off of, or of course you can draft your own. Which reads, the school committee supports the spirit of warrant article 20 to amend the town's general bylaws by adding a new article 8.37 pertaining to menstrual hygiene product access. We believe the spirit of warrant article 20 is consistent with the long-established efforts of the public schools of Brookline to support the health and wellness of students and to provide equity of access. Specifically, the school committee sees alignment between the aims of warrant article 20 and the PSB's ongoing work to support students regardless of gender like expression. The background, I think, is important, and I think if you would just, for folks on camera, I'd like to read it.
Please.
Currently, the Public Schools of Brookline provides free menstrual hygiene products to students who come to the nurse's office and request them. Requiring students to come to the nurse's office for these health products has the potential for two unintended consequences: attaching a stigma of illness or shame to a natural biological function and unnecessary loss of classroom time. By providing free menstrual hygiene products in school bathrooms, PSB would help to remove barriers for some of our students, allowing them to more easily and confidently access these health products and ensuring they spend more time in class. School nurses would continue to be available for education and guidance related to menstruation and other issues of health and wellness, and menstrual hygiene products would still be available through the nurse's office. If the school committee approved a policy consistent with warrant article 20, and I just want to take an aside from reading it, the warrant article would call on the school committee to approve a policy relative to access in schools. It would require the PSB to install dispensers in all bathrooms in schools that serve grades 6 through 12. Costs for the first year, including installation of dispensers, replacing waste baskets, and as again off the script, Ms. Dickoff asked at the public hearing if there were waste dispensers in our bathrooms and how many, and it is inconsistent, and we've determined that the ones that are there should all simply be replaced. And so this is the cost of replacing the ones that are there and adding into the bathrooms the additional waste baskets that may be needed. Costs for the first year, including the installation of dispensers, replacing waste baskets, and supplying the products, are estimated to be $103,722. This estimate includes $89,154 in one-time costs for installing the dispensers and $14,617 for the cost of supplies. The $14,617 is the estimate for the supply budget necessary each year, of course, with the inflation applied to continue the program. I would like to, I'm sure there are many questions about access in bathrooms, and I think we have an expert, someone in health services and student support whose expertise far exceeds mine. So I'd like to invite Ms. Laham up to the microphone to answer any questions.
Thank you for coming tonight.
So I have a question about the cost of supplies today, and why some of that couldn't be applied to the cost here, or is that part of what you have thought?
I actually was not directly involved in the cost analysis of this.
Oh.
I know that what we spend a certain amount in the clinics. We are going to continue to have supplies in the clinic, so I'm not sure how much decrease there would be in the supplies we have. I think some students will still access the clinic, and that might be something that in time we'd know better.
Mm-hmm. So relative to your question, Mr. Tarlowski, relative to your question, this is the estimate of supplies necessary to fill the dispenser machines based on work that Deputy Town Administrator Melissa Goff did, and Ms. Laham's point, I think, is important, that we wouldn't want to decrease what is spent for supplies for our nurse's office. And so until we saw what the potential trend would be, I think that it would be an additional cost, not a savings or a reduction somewhere. And again, this is an estimate that the Deputy Town Administrator did based on the dispensers that the town is considering should the warrant article pass, and what they anticipate excuse me, the annual cost in those dispensers would be. And again, the school costs could be higher or lower, right? It just depends on, it would depend.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the supplies cost. I was just curious about that. But, and so is the idea that the cost for the installations would be carried by a budget outside of ours?
It would be carried by the CIP.
Thank you.
And I believe that's where the town should pass, would build it into future CIPs.
Okay, great.
Other questions from the committee?
Can we just, I don't have the other spreadsheet in front of me that we had at a prior meeting that talked about which bathrooms they would go into. So could someone clarify? I see 200 product dispensers on the estimate. Are these gender-specific bathrooms, all bathrooms? What decision is this estimate based on?
So I think if there are questions about the bathrooms and which bathrooms in our elementary schools, I think Tricia has the expertise of sort of how do we figure that out. This is a little bit more complex because we have bathrooms that in our K-8s that are used by students K through 8, and we have some bathrooms that are 6-8 specific. We have some that are 1-2 specific. It just depends on the building. This estimate is what we believe it would be for the high school, to immediately address the high school, the buildings that are not being renovated, and an estimate of the 6-8 bathrooms that are primarily 6-8, and not so it's a smaller number than what the committee saw before. I do think that there are some, again, if you have questions about sort of the placement and sort of what bathrooms, that may be a policy question, but if there's questions you have.
I guess I was actually just, you actually answered at a much larger capacity than I was actually originally thinking. I was thinking specifically at the high school, which is I think where we have more discussion.
High school would be all bathrooms.
All bathrooms, okay.
I think it might be helpful if we've made it sounds like we made assumptions about the numbers. It might be helpful if we had a footnote that said that this includes which bathrooms this would include. So if it doesn't include every single bathroom, to have an understanding that if we went into every single bathroom, what that, is that a double cost? Is that
This doesn't correspond to the first sentence in the last paragraph, which says it would, if there were a policy was approved, it would require PSB to install dispensers in all bathrooms in schools in all bathrooms that serve grades 6 to 12. I think that's supposed to mean.
That means every bathroom.
No, well, if
that doesn't. I think there's a more specific assumption to Ms. Schreiner-Holmes' point of it, because this assumption is based on a decision of which bathrooms are primarily used by 6 through 8, as opposed to, I could go through school by school, like some of the different, but it's a little bit more complicated. So, and I think that there are still questions the committee had of, if there's an elementary school bathroom that's right by the cafeteria that's K through 8, should the dispenser be in there or not? Should they be in the middle school wing, closer to where students' classes are? So, I think that there's a lot that would have to get vetted out in a policy discussion. So this is an assumption. It's not every bathroom that would be accessed by a 6th, 7th, or 8th grader. This is, and quite frankly, I think there's a question about is that an artificial starting point for 6th grade, right? Is that the right starting point or not? It's a question that certainly I think is an important one before any decisions were made about installation.
I mean, I wouldn't, just because of all the language that's in the last paragraph that sort of talks about bathrooms and budgets and everything, I wouldn't put it in a footnote. I would just somewhere in that paragraph, clarify the basis for the budget. That, this is, and if this is an approximation of what might be the right, this isn't every bathroom in every school, but the idea is trying to make sure that they're available in the bathrooms that are convenient to the kids from menstrual age up.
I mean, essentially, we're just, again, supporting Article 20, but we do not have to decide which bathrooms at this point. And, I mean, Mr. Glover, you're working hard on this, right, at the policy level?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, one of the questions I have on this is if we're, with the language that we have, what in fact are we saying? And if we do something that deviates from the actual warrant article in terms of eventually, are we not fulfilling our commitment of support if we give it in this form here? Does that make sense?
Well, I have the same issue that where I think that a town meeting member reading this piece of paper wouldn't necessarily know exactly what's going to be happening in the schools. And I think we need to be clear that, I mean, it does say, if the school committee approved a policy, if we did something, but some town meeting members might read that as that's what we're planning on doing. But we're not, it doesn't say that. And it may be, it could, we haven't gotten to the level. This needs to come through policy before we act on it.
Yeah, I think, truth be told, I'm not sure we know what we're going to be doing exactly. Right? So.
I'm just worried it has too many details,
Well, it
and we're
gives-
not quite there yet.
Right, it gives detail. I think you could, one could read a town meeting member could read this and believe that this
We
is
put it
what
in
they
our
have
budget. We put it in our
dictated is
budget.
happening, right?
So I think it was clear.
Also, and I just suggest there's also a path to say the school committee fully supports this at Brookline High School and will pursue a policy in our K-8 to decide where to install dispensers, where is most appropriate, and how to support. Because one of the things, when Tricia and I spoke about this warrant article, one of the things that I didn't think of initially relative to the warrant article was a concern that I believe I'm capturing correctly that Tricia articulated of the importance of students having the opportunity to interact with our nurses. Our professionals are incredibly dedicated. I mean, our nurses are so dedicated to the health and wellness of all of our kiddos. And so we want to make sure that we don't lose that personal connection, and we want to make sure that there's access for products where and when students need them so that students don't have to go to the nurse's office. And I think there's a policy question about how do you balance those, and that we want to sort of be careful, we would sort of carefully consider. And so it could be sort of a nuance. I think I would say, as superintendent, I think we should do this at BHS as soon as is feasible. I mean, I think that this is, from what we heard from our petitioner, our co-petitioner, this is really important to get in place at a large campus to support our students. It's something we need to do. I think that we need to do it in our K-8s, and we need to figure out how. And I think that that's the policy question. So there may be a way to word that, that the committee, if that path is something the committee is comfortable with, there may be a way to word that in this statement to town meeting.
So are we suggesting that for this to happen in the high school, we would not go through policy? That's what I'm confused about.
I mean, I think, and I've said this before. But I think, if we're going to be setting, I don't think this, I'm not sure, or my instinct is that we shouldn't use this as an opportunity for this body to supplant the way we would normally pass a policy. If there's an operational issue that Superintendent Bott wants to take on, that's fine. But I think if we're going to do anything that's sort of this body acting or a subset of this body acting, it should probably start in policy. Or continue in policy. Thank you.
Well, instead of, I mean, I think reading the first three paragraphs, the opening paragraph and the two paragraphs under background, that all sounds great to me. I mean, it all sounds right to me. And then then it could, instead of saying if the school committee approved a policy consistent, it could say that we have that this is being taken up by the school committee's policy subcommittee. It is currently being reviewed by the school committee's policy subcommittee, I don't know. Do we want to? I mean, if this is factual, if the school committee approved a policy consistent with the warrant article, it would require a certain, a certain action. The warrant article doesn't.
We have one of the petitioners here who might be able to help us through some of this, possibly.
Would you like to share any reflections? Oh, okay. Yes. Yes, please.
You know that.
So, hi, Rebecca Stone. Nice to see you all. Thank you for doing this. Last night at the advisory committee's consideration of warrant Article 20, Harry Friedman actually suggested that it was a little odd that the school committee would be voting on this warrant article, which does not in fact compel the school committee, the schools, to do anything. So I think that in that spirit, you could very reasonably acknowledge that in your statement. I think that the way your draft statement has started, which is that the school committee supports I wouldn't call it the spirit, I would say the intent of warrant Article 20, but has no opinion about whether or not the does not take a position on whether or not the town does this. And then just explain that the school committee, as a result of warrant Article 20, is moving with all deliberate speed to address this issue in the public schools. And that the superintendent has already opined that the priority is at Brookline High School, and that the school committee will continue to develop its policy in terms of rolling this out, but that the intent is to do this in the public schools as well. I think you would do well to acknowledge that there's Massachusetts legislation that would be requiring the schools to do it, and that you're simply moving forward without that stick. But you don't have to go through. I don't believe you have to go through the costs. I don't believe you have to go through the policy consistent with warrant Article 20. I don't think you have to do any of that in your statement right now. You simply need to say what you do at the beginning, which is that you support the intent of warrant Article 20 and are moving with all deliberate speed to make sure that the public schools of Brookline implement something similar.
The only thing I would include in that statement is with the financial support from the town's budget or from whatever budget it's coming out of. I mean, if we're moving with full deliberate speed, I mean, we need to know where the money is coming from for it.
Saying that you're moving with all deliberate speed would include that. All deliberate speed merely means that you are taking this seriously and moving forward with it with the intent to do something. The budgeting, the warrant article specifically says, I think the last piece of it says that this will take effect in the public schools upon adoption by the school committee. So all you have to do is say, we believe in the intent of warrant Article 20, and we are working towards adopting a policy, a similar policy for the public schools. You don't need to give specifics to town meeting. That's entirely up to you.
Who is going to vote the budget for this? I mean, there's a cost implication here.
It has no implications for the current year budget.
I get that. But
So-
we're saying something that we plan to do. I think we need to know where the money's going to come from to do
And
it.
that's fine, but that's a conversation for this school committee to have as you move forward, as you talk about the next fiscal year budget, as you talk about the budget after that. That is not something that you need to decide tonight, or make a comment to an explanation at town meeting for. You're not asking town meeting to give you extra money for that this year. No, not in this, but not at this town meeting. You're not asking for, I mean, unless you decide to, but that's not in my pay grade right now. But to solve the current problem that you have about what you say and how much of this statement you actually use for town meeting, I don't believe you have to go much beyond the first paragraph. I mean, I think it would be great to include pieces of the second and third, but I don't think you need to worry the details the way it felt like you were worrying them.
So let me, I missed some of what you said, but let me just try reading. The school committee supports the intent of warrant Article 20 and is working toward a similar policy for the public schools of Brookline. We believe, we could just say this is consistent. This is a little vague, but we could say this is consistent with the long-established efforts of the public schools of Brookline to support the health and wellness of students and to provide equity of access. Specifically, the school committee sees alignment between the aims of warrant Article 20 and the PSB's ongoing work to support students regardless of gender, gender identity, or expression. And then I would keep the next two paragraphs. I'm not sure I would even put, I would take out background and just say, currently the public schools of Brookline provide free menstrual hygiene products to students who come to the nurse's office and request them. Personally, I think that this is worth sharing, just to understand an important context with it, how it is meaningful within the schools. Requiring students to come to the nurse's office for these health products has the potential for two unintended consequences: attaching a stigma of illness or shame to natural biological functions and necessary loss of classroom time. By providing free menstrual hygiene products in school bathrooms, PSB would help to remove barriers for some of our students, allowing them to more easily and confidently access these health products and ensuring that they spend more time in class. School nurses would continue to be available for education and guidance related to menstruation and other issues of health and wellness. And menstrual hygiene products would still be available through the nurse's offices, period. End.
Great. I think we're in doing just the 3 sentences, you're missing something about when you skip to paragraph 3, when you get to paragraph 3 and saying by providing free menstrual hygiene products, at no point in did I miss, when you were reading it again, did I miss where we said, and we are going to provide?
Well, yes, because it starts out by saying that the school committee is working toward a similar policy for the public schools of Brookline. In other words, it's not just saying we're working toward a policy, and that for these reasons. So it's not saying, and they will be available in all of our bathrooms next week. It's not saying that. It's just saying that we are aligned with this direction for the following reasons. Unless somebody wants to say something different.
No, I guess I was just sort of contemplating. I was thinking about Mr. Glover's comments about whether or not we needed a policy to do this. Do we need a policy, and does the school, like, there are two implications. One is budget and one is policy in saying the statement.
The school committee is considering.
I mean, does the school committee want to make a statement, a promise, without knowing the information about the policy or the budget yet?
I don't think we have any money to make promises.
That's what I'm saying. So part of this is making a promise that we're going to do something that we don't have the money to do. That being said, I am in complete support that we should do this. I think we should do this. I'm just wondering about the wording about our recommendation and what that looks like, what the appropriate way to word support is.
In the first sentence, we're saying intention, so I'm not too concerned about it. We're going to work through those things. It's not a binding commitment. It just means that we're genuinely going to make the effort. We're going to try, that we're in agreement with the intention.
Also, the idea of...
I'm sorry, can you tell me where the intention is?
Well, Ms. Stone proposed that in the first sentence of our statement, that instead of saying that the school committee supports the spirit of the warrant article, that we would support the intent of the warrant article. And to me, that gives us enough room just in case, by some chance, we can't find a way to make it work. But I'm optimistic that we'll be able to.
Yeah, I think we will too. I was more concerned about the paragraphs below. The first paragraph I didn't have any concerns really with. I don't think. It was by providing, it sort of makes a statement that we're going to do it. I don't know, am I the only, I'm swimming alone here? I don't.
I was saying the exact same thing. I think we need to sort of take a step back, take a breath, and let the town and see what they're going to do. And I would try and include something that it would be our expectation that the town would, along with, well, I don't know. Go ahead.
So, rewording policies at 8:30 at night is not my thing, but it does seem to me that there is enough clarity of intent that we should find language that declares our intent, which is different from declaring that we are absolutely going to do something no matter what. And I think that there's a lot of optimism that we will be able to work this out, although I do think that there's just there's some sort of very practical questions about where the money on the town side is going to come from, and is money for the school side going to come from the same place, or is there an expectation that we are going to find money from a different place? So to my mind, that's a very practical short-term question that we can work through and try to get an answer to. But I do think that's different from saying we support the intent of this warrant article on the, I'm always quite hesitant to say that we support things the town should be doing. I think that we should limit our statements in all instances at which I'm at a microphone to things that the school committee is doing, and not say we support the town should be doing things, because I think that just gets us into murky waters. So I think we should just make a statement about what we believe about the schools and not overstate it and not understate it, if that helps.
So are you comfortable with the first paragraph, or you're wanting to have different language for the first sentence that takes away some of the, we support that the warrant article is asking the town to do this? And put it on ourselves? Like, we support the spirit of the warrant as it applies to the school.
I think it is dangerous territory for us to start opining on things the town should or shouldn't be doing. So, for example, just as an analogy, when we did the Indigenous Peoples Day statement, we did not actually support, there was a long conversation here, and we didn't support the warrant article as it was, that the town should form a committee with Indigenous people on it, and there was all sorts of stuff. We didn't support any of that. What we said was, we think that, we're going to, we like Indigenous Peoples Day, and we're going to do the following things. So for me, personally, I think that keeping it to staying in our lane is important. Meaning we support the intent of this warrant article as, for us. And we appreciate the language that relates to the school committee, and the conversations to date have reflected, this isn't a policy statement, right? It's just a note. It's just our report. Like, the conversations to date have reflected our, pretty much unanimous interest in finding a way to make this happen, subject to practical concerns, budget concerns, however we want to word it. I don't know if we have to wordsmith it right now, but I think if we can get a very simple paragraph or two, that might be the strongest thing. And if there are things that, with the chair's sort of caveat of saying, let's say that it actually is already available at the nurse's office, so let's make sure people know that, so we're not starting from zero.
So do we not want to call it a recommendation at all? It's an advisory or some other word? Statement. Okay. Do we want to?
Have Mr. Cole now as
Yeah.
recommendation.
Further wordsmithing, or leave it to the chair and vice chair to work with the superintendent to fulfill the discussion as.
Second.
All right. Well and good. Thank you. Do we need a vote? I guess we do need a vote because we had a hearing and.
Yes.
Okay. So, want to make a motion? Okay, which was, the motion was to have the chair work with the superintendent to revise the statement per the discussion as. All in favor? No, I'm sorry, Mr. Glover.
I'm going to abstain from this vote because I'm wary of what the language may say, and I'm not sure that I'm going to be behind it. I fully support addressing and improving the availability of menstrual hygiene products in our schools, and we need to tackle that and take it on in policy, and just because we should just go and start doing stuff. But for the reasons I just said in terms of the language and knowing what it's going to be.
There's a suggestion here that we might be able to get a unanimous vote if, instead of deputizing the chair to work with the superintendent, we deputize the policy chair to work with the superintendent to revise the language.
I have a feeling that no one will be made like what I come up with.
So you would not be doing it in the spirit of the
Well,
discussion?
what if on inquiry, what if we deputize the vice chair? Would you trust her?
Just let me abstain.
All right.
Is it possible that we come back with the language at the next school committee meeting?
We could, but then it won't, because we were moving the date of the school committee
It won't get to town meeting. It would have.
Not
if
even
we
in the
met on
supplement? No.
No, because if we met on the 9th, but the people at the.
I will say for the committee, just to note, Ms. Snow Miller in the back of the room was taking copious notes of that conversation. And so I think that the statement will quite accurately reflect the will of the committee.
All right, all in favor of the motion, please indicate in the usual way. All abstaining. 1. Thank you very much. All right, back to you, Mr. Superintendent.
All right, warrant Article 23. So I think the question for warrant Article 23 is that this actually says the school committee supports the spirit of warrant Article 23, but I believe that this warrant article in fact applies to the school committee, so we would need to change that wording. So a couple of bit of background. If you remember, the petitioners on this warrant article presented that the public schools of Brookline had 10 vehicles. We actually have 3 that are assigned to us. We have 2 Priuses, and we have a van. And I don't know how to best describe the van, but when you're driving by Brookline High School, parked off of right at the corner of Tappan and Greenough, is a rather old van. The side was gouged up for a while. It has been repaired.
The van is from the time of the last renovation of the high school.
So those are the 3 vehicles. We do not, in fact, have 10 vehicles in the fleet. So a couple of things to consider about the warrant article. So again, this draft statement says the recommendation supports the spirit of warrant Article 23. In fact, the school committee would have to support or not support warrant Article 23. Pertaining to electrifying the vehicle fleet deployed by the town, including vehicles used by the town or contractors to provide transportation to and from school and school activities. We believe warrant Article 23 is consistent with the long-established efforts of the public schools of Brookline to support the health and wellness of students and demonstrate genuine concern for our environment by producing less waste and pollution through our routine daily activities. Specifically, the school committee sees alignment between the aims of warrant Article 23 on electrifying of school buses and vans used for student transportation when we are able to obtain pricing at 25% or less increase over current service contracts, and the available electric vehicles fit our needs on a practical basis. There's a lot of background information then to make clear that I think that threshold of 25% is still a number of years off. So in the background information, you see that the cost of a full-size electric bus, I guess, should I read this for the camera, Mr. Pollack, or just to highlight? Sure. So the PSB Director of Operations has recently researched the price and practicality to bring electric school buses to Brookline. The cost of a full-size electric bus is about $365,000 as compared to $90,000 for the same size school bus with a diesel or gas-powered motor. The technology is new for school buses and expected to be available more widely, I would add, for the start of the 2020-21 school year. Orders take 9 to 12 months for buses to be built and ready for use. The manufacturer's published mileage range on a fully charged bus is expected to be 100 and 120 miles. Gas or diesel-powered buses would still be needed for longer out-of-town trips until the technology improves to meet our needs. The charging time for these buses is expected to be 6 to 8 hours to fully recharge them. Relative to using electric vehicles, PSB will seek funding from the following sources when they are next available. Funds to reduce the cost of electric vehicles from the state of Massachusetts, funds for the infrastructure works to set up charging stations from Eversource, and I just want to, as an aside, as you know, that the town received through the VW settlement high-speed charging stations that will be installed. There are additional funds through the VW settlement, I believe sort of a different bucket of funds that Eversource has access to install infrastructure for things like electric buses. Eversource is not in a granting cycle for that, but Mr. Gillis has been in contact with Eversource this week to understand the process, and it's something that for many reasons Eversource is very interested in. I will leave it at that, but Eversource, I think, is very interested in the electrification of transportation of vehicles. So I do believe we actually, Mr. Gillis took the bold step of asking Eversource if they might not only install chargers for electric buses, but while they were doing it, pave the parking area, sort of the pad for buses, which they did note that they'd never been asked before, but that it was an interesting question. And then the third bullet is private sector financing to capture any tax incentives that could possibly keep costs down for the Brookline taxpayer. Certainly, if we're purchasing buses, there would be financing needs to do so. Relative to school vans, I would just want to make clear to the school committee that it seems that the technology is actually farther away for vans based on how we use vans than from yellow buses. And it sounds a bit sort of backwards, but we don't typically drive our buses in town more than 100 to 120 miles on a given day. So, and it's urban driving, so there's a lot of opportunity based on the technology for the batteries to recharge through the braking. Our vans, however, have a different level of use, and our vendor has explored using electric vehicles, but the cost of the vehicles and the longer charging times versus the quick refueling currently available for the fossil fuel vans and a much shorter mileage range for the electric motor on the vans makes these vehicles just not a viable option for our vendor at this time. The limitations of range, available charging stations around the region, and additional costs have tabled the pursuit with our vendor at this time. And again, that's, we have far more vans that we access through our vendor than we do yellow school buses. So it becomes an infrastructure question, a charging question. Certainly, I think it's worth the school committee opining on, when technology achieves that 25% threshold, likely our van vendors would also, could also pursue electrification. I also think the complexity of our fleet and the size of our town, I don't think that it's I wouldn't recommend at this time that the school committee think about electrifying or bringing the van services in-house. I think that there is a path as technology becomes more feasible for yellow buses because of the small size of our yellow bus fleet, that we could potentially bring the yellow bus service back in-house. But I don't believe that we're at a point, not back in-house, but to bring in-house. I do not believe that is feasible for us for our vans. And so the vans are just a little bit more complicated in many ways, somewhat ironically than the larger yellow buses. And then the back page has the table of costs, again, just as background information that Mr. Gillis has put together. And this could be included or not. I just have it here for your consideration tonight. Yes?
I had a quick question about the driver wages. Is that are the driver wages, this kind of goes to Helen's question before about what we already pay with related to
That's a part of our contract, so we pay that already as a part of our contract with.
So we wouldn't have additional driver costs?
All of the additional cost is that $716,763 of the difference between the annual cost. Currently, it's the third line down, net budget, electric versus diesel. So it includes the finance. So that's the difference in cost. The healthcare costs, the labor, the salaries. That's all embedded into our contract currently. So those wouldn't be new costs.
I would suggest that to the extent that if we're accepting other parts of this, that we take off that bottom part of the chart, because I think it could cause confusion.
I'm not sure why.
Because I think when you I don't know, you're saying.
Because the total cost, if I'm reading this correctly, is $1,539,000 per year.
It's just, I think that Ms. Schreiner-Oldham raises a good point. That table is detail for the first three lines. And so if the first three lines are what's important, the net difference.
That's fine.
I think the detail can.
Yeah. I mean, the reason well, it's fine. I actually got an email from one of the petitioners, Jesse Gray, who actually, we discussed this at Capital Subcommittee. We went over all the details of this, and he said he was very impressed with the presentation that Mr. Gillis made, so I think that should be communicated to him, and I will certainly do that too. But he understood the issues, and that's why the language of the actual article says that the 25% and that, you know, not expecting the schools to try and raise this kind of money.
And relative to our 2 cars, I mean, that's easy when it's time to replace the cars. That's, I think that it's a non-question. That's an easy one. So I think that's the most straightforward part for the schools relative to this warrant article.
And I'm sorry, because I was probably wandering. Where is that on here?
It's not on there, so it's on my notes that I added, so I can add that.
Right. That would be good.
Yeah.
And where are we on the conversation we just had about keeping the detail or ditching the detail? We're going to take the detail off? Okay. And then I was going to suggest just cutting some of the opening words in the first 4 lines. So I thought it might be simpler to say, the school committee supports warrant article 23 as it pertains to the PSB.
Okay.
Period. And then strike all the way down to the 4th line and start again. Warrant article 23 is consistent with the long-established efforts of the public schools.
Okay.
But I think, you know, we get to the detail further on in the memo, and it just says that we, and to Ms. Ditkoff's very good point, we are specifically supporting the parts of the warrant article that pertain to the schools. Yes.
You said you were going to add the 3 vehicles and like our timeline for when we would do that. You'll put that in there. And then the only other.
Well, so it's 2 because one's a
2,
van.
I'm sorry. 2.
Yeah, so the technology is just not there for the van, but certainly for the 2 cars.
So you'll put in for the two vehicles, the 2 cars.
The timeline is
Just like that language that when it is time to replace them. The only other question I was wondering about was whether it would be useful to state directly in the school bus paragraph what the percentage increase actually is, so that it makes it very obvious that it's beyond the 25% that the warrant article.
Okay.
I don't know what the percent is, but, and maybe that's, I don't know, do other people think that's not a good idea to put it in there? I just think it really makes it clear for people.
Depends on your estimation of the town meeting member and their ability to do math in their head.
Yeah.
No, I think it's perfectly fine.
It's almost done. 50% almost.
You mean 100%, right?
100%, sorry.
Right. It's fine. Okay. Are we done? Is this, we're happy with this? Okay. So, somebody want to move it? Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Monopoly and Ms. Charlevsky. On the recommendation, the motion, all in favor? That's unanimous.
This one's a recommendation.
Nope,
I
took out
changed them to, I took all those out.
All right, thank you all. That we made it through wordsmithing, I think, for the night. On to Ms. Deputy Superintendent No Miller.
Hi, everyone. I'm here to give the committee a brief update on where we are since I last presented on the process in the district's response to the PRS complaint that we received regarding substandard space in the district. Highlighted here is where we are. The DESE had requested corrective action steps, and so we are on track to meeting that deadline of submitting some corrective action steps. And so I just want to remind the committee of what those are. The district had to immediately relocate special education students who are receiving services in hallways to appropriate instructional spaces, and then we had to provide a list of schools where instruction in the hallways were happening, and then list out what the remediation is for that, and then lastly include an accessibility plan specifically for peer school for how we will ensure access to nursing services for students with limited mobility. So for the first corrective action in terms of having to relocate students and list the schools, this was occurring in 2 schools. So at Driscoll, thanks to Dr. Talukdar and her colleagues there, we were able to find additional space, and this is shared space I want to add, where we would relocate the special education instructional groups to the MECO office in the basement. So this is shared space with the MECO employees there, share space with the Mandarin classroom, and then carve out additional space within the classroom. And when I mean carve out, it's just using furniture to create space. Next year, we will of course have the same space constraints, and so we will have to utilize strategic scheduling over the summer as we think about how to create space for these groups that were previously taught in the hallways. I do want to add that if the override does not get passed, there will be capital implications here, because we will have to create more permanent space, or space that will last longer than it would if the project is not happening.
Question about, at Driscoll, I'm somewhat familiar with the space, but not intimately familiar. Right now, the special education classrooms, there's one up on the 3rd floor, and it's already a very shared space. I'm not imagining any special education classrooms at Driscoll that are not already very, very shared. So are we talking about taking very, very shared spaces and making them even more shared?
I have to get the details, so I can get back to you on that one. It could be the case.
Okay, I understand that this is a really difficult and challenging problem, but I'm remembering I believe I'm remembering and getting all of the schools a little confused, but I think at Driscoll, the special education classroom is already shared by 5. That there's one.
So there is something in the basement for the lower grades, and it's shared by, it's not 5, but it's less than 5, but I want to say it's 3 or 4 educators, and that space actually was fine. Those are the younger students. We're looking at, so the overflow that was happening in the hallways is for the upper grades.
And so it would be great to get an idea of what shared space those shared spaces are going into.
So I had similar questions. I'm having trouble visualizing shared space. For instance, in a Mandarin classroom.
So the Mandarin class is not happening at that time.
Okay, that's what.
Yeah. No, so for the first 2 bullets, but for the sharing and special ed classrooms, some instruction is happening while these groups are moving in. But I will get the details in terms of where they are and how many groups are in these spaces. And I want to recognize again, and I think I said this last time too, this is not ideal. Yeah, this is tight.
I just want to make for any audience that we might have, or just so that we are all fully aware of the situation, I don't want anyone to think that these are easy fixes to any of these, and to say that they're not ideal doesn't even begin to appreciate how sucky this is. And so, it's hard unless you've seen these spaces and seen how crunched they actually are. I mean, in some of the spaces at some of the schools, the kids wear noise canceling headphones during their specialized their literacy services, because there are other groups that are going on at the same time, and it's really distracting to have multiple groups in a shared classroom trying to receive different language services or different things. And so I just want to make sure that as we're having conversations about this and we get questions about this from the public, that we have an appreciation of that, and that we can help get this
I think to Ms. Schreiner-Oldham's point, what this is a temporary plan that the state is willing to approve that is far from ideal, but it's on the condition of the debt exclusion passing. And should the debt exclusion not pass, we will need, Ms. Miller and I will need to come back to the committee and say, this is the capital cost. These are the rooms that we need to divide. We're trying, relative to Driscoll, we've worked really hard relative to Driscoll, knowing that there's the possibility that a year from now, construction would be beginning, to not do things like divide the faculty room, to eliminate the computer lab, to carve out, build another space in the library. And those are all terrible solutions too, right? There's no good solution. And this sharing of spaces is something that the state, that the department has said is a better condition than the one that exists and is far from ideal. And they're willing to accept it relative to Driscoll because of the possibility of the building project. So, excuse me. So if the vote doesn't pass, we will be having another conversation shortly about the capital costs and different disruption. Because even if there's another vote down the road in several years, the window will grow long enough that these solutions for Driscoll that the state would no longer find acceptable.
So I think this is only a question for Driscoll. Even if the override passes, these are going to be the conditions for 2.5 years. Okay, so I think we should just understand what temper. 3.5 years. Well, I guess we're in May. All right. Okay. So 3 and a bit years.
Yes.
And so we feel, I just want us to understand that temporary is 3 years, and if we're comfortable with that.
So is this shared space that you're describing now, is that what we'll have next year?
So this is
Or is this just for now until the end of the year?
It's from now until the end of the year. That's the arrangement for now.
Right. And so then what do we think will happen next year?
This is where scheduling comes into play. So we don't yet know, but they have the directive that they do have to find space. And I just want to add that the department, I did include an update on all the building projects and the phases that they are in, including dates, so they are aware that these are multi-year temporary solutions.
And I think relative to scheduling, it's at the level, and this is not a great solution, but it's at the level of there are certain services that happen every morning when extended day is not in their space, and so that becomes an assigned instructional space from 8 to 10 or 8 to 11, and then it no longer is. And similarly, our BEEP classroom is has students in it till 12:15's dismissal. So starting at 12:30, from 12:30 to 2:30, these services, and so it's taking and what's hard about that is if you are not the early education teacher, you feel like a guest in the space, or if it's we have to figure out the sharing of spaces. But that's when Ms. Miller talks about the scheduling for next year. This is an 8-week condition, and some of this will go away in the scheduling. Again, based on current needs, and if there were a spike in services, or this is incredibly complicated for Driscoll, and we're trying to avoid significant capital expenses, based on the hope that there's a successful vote and the project moves forward sooner rather than later.
So it is a bit of a burden, we know, for both not only the visiting teacher who's coming in, but also the host teacher.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who now feels that he or she can't be in the room.
Absolutely.
Getting things ready for the next day, or so it is hard kind of on everybody. Yeah.
It is really hard. Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
And it's hard on the students because, again, it doesn't feel permanent. They may have to bring their stuff out and then put it away in a way that they may not want to do. So,
yeah. Yeah.
At Lincoln, What the letter of finding from the department listed was there is a small group that meets on the 3rd floor in a hallway. And what we have been able to do is find space in a shared office that's currently now for the ECS teacher and the augmentative and alternative communication specialist. They do not see students in that office, so we will have to find space for their desks elsewhere in the building. I'm working with Matt Gillis to identify where we can place those desks where it doesn't pose a fire hazard. But that small group can meet. The difficulty there is the small group. Now the students will have to travel further from their classrooms, which then cuts into learning time.
I just had another thought. So how would they feel about the workspaces we have, like in the Coolidge Corner School, that's out in the hallway? Like they're designed to be workspaces in the hallway.
But they're not designed to be special education workspaces, right? So
It could be though, right? I mean, but that's what I'm asking.
But Coolidge has the different. So they also have the empty pull-out rooms where you could go and deliver. So the idea is that those spaces are for project-based learning. And not for the delivery of services. And so I would actually argue, and Ms. No Miller can correct me if she has a different opinion. I would argue that if we were delivering special education services in those spaces at Coolidge Corner, DESE would have a finding against us.
We want us to ensure that our students with disabilities has equal access to all the rooms, that the quality of rooms are the same.
One more thing, another thing that really stood out to me as I was going over the substandard space report and visiting the different schools is that because often the special education groups are of smaller cohorts of students, as we've experienced the space crunch, that we've moved multiple groups of those students who are receiving special education services into cramped spaces throughout all of the schools. And just as we're planning for next year and thinking about as scheduling, and again, I worry about the sharing of special education classrooms, that we're putting more special education services into special education classrooms that are already stuffed, that just because they're smaller cohorts of students, if I'm going to say this, and I think I do believe this, that I think I would almost, I personally would almost rather support larger class sizes for our general education classes to free up space so that it is not, that we do not continuously have space sacrifices that we're making and that are impacting special education services in different ways than we're impacting our general education students. And I think that we have a responsibility to do that, and we have such a crunch. We're not doing it intentionally, but it seems that it is happening. And so as we're thinking about planning for next year, I really would ask that you and others really look at it with that lens of, are we meeting our legal responsibility to our students with special education and who are receiving special education services?
No, it's something I can certainly discuss with the superintendent as we move forward in this process. The last corrective action step was the accessibility plan at Pierce, and really this is about a student students with limited mobility, a student in a wheelchair, gaining access into the nursing suite. We met with Charlie Simmons and Matt Gillis, the superintendent, myself, Tricia Laham, and Principal Ryan Miller met to discuss different options, and the temporary option, and again, this is the department accepting that the school has been invited as part of the MSBA process to engage in the renovation process, that the temporary fix is to widen that doorway. So that, correct, so when you go into the main office, the doorway to your right would be widened. And so that will that work will begin in July and will be completed before the school year begins.
I think it's important for the committee to know that if order of magnitude, if Pierce were not in the MSBA pipeline, we would be looking at somewhere from $500,000 to $750,000 to move plumbing, to move all sorts of work that Mr. Simmons has hired architects in the past to develop relative to the entire office suite. And this is, again, a temporary solution that the MSBA is willing to consider that is order of magnitude smaller in terms of cost because Pierce has been invited into the pipeline. So it makes the office itself accessible and it leaves challenges with the bathroom in the office, but makes the office itself accessible where it currently isn't. So again, if that process were to stop for any reason, we would be looking at a CIP project, several years down the road, probably closer to $1 million.
Thank you. All right, we have possible vote to approve FY 2020 federal, state, and local grant applications and accept subsequent awards, subject to conditions.
You didn't do it, so yeah, so then we won't.
Not going to do it?
They have on in case it got to finance.
Oh, okay.
So,
and what about, okay, so we're going to skip that. And possible vote to approve MOA with AFSCME?
yes, that is on.
Excellent.
So before you is we've discussed it previously, the AFSCME, the tentative AFSCME agreement. It was ratified by membership about a week and a half ago, so it's before the committee for consideration for your approval. And this is the AFSCME food service. We discussed it about a month ago, a month and a half ago in school committee meeting. So,
is there anything you want us to, you want to point out something?
it's exactly the same. It's unchanged from what we discussed. So it's yeah, completely unchanged. There was a scheduling challenge for scheduling the ratification vote, so that was what the delay was between when we last discussed it and tonight's proposed vote to ratify it.
So I'll move it, but I have a question.
Do we have a second? Thank you.
Is this, what we're ratifying here, is it included in next year's budget?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Other questions or discussion on the motion? On the motion? All in favor, please indicate. That is unanimous. Thank you so much. Superintendent's report.
So on Friday, April 12th, the Brookline Education Foundation announced their generous financial support for the coming year, including their district-wide grants for the 2019-2020 school year. The system-wide grants funded by the Brookline Education Foundation next year include grants totaling $68,200. These grants include an educational equity, excellence in equity, seeding, feeding, and cultivating cultural proficiency in our schools, $40,000 of support, and that is to support professional development that Dr. Warnham has proposed to the Brookline Education Foundation in alignment with what you heard earlier this evening. Training for it's $11,200 for 2 members of the leadership team to attend the SEED, Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity training. This is incredibly powerful training. There's SEED training happening this year at the high school, and it has for many years at the high school. And so this is to train 2 additional district leaders, whether it's principals or deputy superintendents, for next year. Reading between the lines, equity reading and early intervention, $13,000 to support that grant. And a system-wide teacher learning by teachers, for teachers grant of $4,000. And all of these funds, it's important to know the Brookline Education Foundation works incredibly closely, hand in hand with Dr. Gittens, Gabe McCormick, Dr. Warnham, Ms. No Miller, to ensure that what they are funding in district-wide grants support the work of the district and the goals of the school committee. And it goes without saying that the support of the Brookline Education Foundation is invaluable in the town of Brookline. In addition, the BEF is funding 22 teacher grants totaling $48,000 and 19 collaborative grants totaling $157,000. This amazing level of support for the school district and our educators is unprecedented. We're fortunate, incredibly fortunate, to be the beneficiary of the Brookline Education Foundation's steadfast support. On a related note, it was my pleasure to join Liz Ascoli, Katie Bacon, and Emily Dolbear from the BEF on Tuesday, April 9th, as we surprised this year's Caverly Award recipients, Laura Vish, speech and language pathologist at Runkle School, and Mark Vanderzee, performing arts teacher at Brookline High School. We look forward to honoring Ms. Vish and Mr. Vanderzee at BEF's Celebrating Teachers reception on Tuesday, May 14th at Newberry College. I will add, for those of you, I'm not sure if anyone has been a part of the announcement, but it's always a shock, and to see a whole host of people sort of walk into your space, there's a moment of nervousness. And at Runkle, there was I believe the entire special education department in the hallway, and Ms. Vish was in a meeting with the principal and vice principal, and came out, and the office at Runkle is all glass, and just sort of looked for a minute like, what is happening? And just incredible celebration of Ms. Vish and her commitment to her students, her unwavering commitment to her students, as well as Mr. Vanderzee. His students were on stage, and they enjoyed celebrating his Caverly Award along with him. And finally, on Friday night, March 29th, many of you were there. An intrepid team of PSB staff participated in the BEF's annual Trivia Bee held in the Coolidge Corner School cafeteria. Thanks to a complimentary table provided by the BEF, we fielded a full team of 8, including Dr. Mary Brown, Principal Jen Buller, Kelly Durgan, Meg Massini, Gabe McCormick, Scott Moore, Saeed Ola, and Jeremy Stull. The Trivia Bee, as you know, is always competitive and festive. I think a little more competitive than festive. And the evening was a resounding fundraising success for the BEF. Thanks to all of my colleagues who were so ably represented the entire district, and they are already talking about next year's Trivia Bee. We've hosted 3 very successful renaming nights as a part of the process to select a new name for the Coolidge Corner School. April 3rd at CCS, April 11th at the Brookline Public Library main branch, and April 23rd at Brookline High. Members of the Student Nominations Committee, our believers of change, had researched each of the semifinalist names and were prepared to, at each meeting, to share what they had learned. The community members who participated in the renaming nights had thoughtful questions and feedback as they circulated around the room and visited each team's table. I want to acknowledge the tremendous work that the Student Nominations Committee members have done throughout this entire process, led by Principal Jen Buller and Vice Principal Saeed Ola. I'm also very grateful to all of them, all of our students, as well as Ms. Buller and Mr. Ola for their dedication to this important work. Feedback on the semifinalist names is being accepted through April 29th. And then our student group will reconvene, review and consider all the feedback, and work to select 3 to 5 names to bring to the school committee in May. And we are planning tentatively to have a presentation at the start of the May 29th school committee meeting from 6 to 7 with our student nominations committee coming to the school committee. Not in the report, but I would like to say that to members of the committee, Ms. Dickhoff and Ms. Fetterspiel know this from being involved in the process. Our students worked really hard, and as a group themselves, decided on the criteria that they used to select the names from the 119 to 15. They were given the town's naming criteria, and the students and themselves, in an unfacilitated conversation, engaged in work and decided that it was very important for one of the criteria to be what is the restorative nature of the names that they were moving forward relative to the fact that the school had been named for so long after a slaveholder. And so that was a criteria that the students felt, given the history of the Edward Devotion name and the opportunity that was presented to them and to our community in the renaming process, to add in addition to the town's naming criteria. And so when you get questions about how that came about, that was the process. It was something that our students themselves decided was incredibly important. So happy to answer other questions about that that you may have. As you know, Vicki Milstein has announced her retirement from the public schools of Brookline at the end of the school year. Ms. Milstein's contributions to the district's early education program are immeasurable, and her dedication to the youngest learners in Brookline is beyond compare. Under her trailblazing leadership, the BEAT program became a model for early education. I know you join me in wishing Ms. Milstein all the best in her well-deserved retirement. I've decided that the program will be best served by the appointment of an interim principal for the 2019-2020 school year. On April 5th, I announced that Dr. Regina Watts, currently Early Childhood Program Coordinator, has been selected to be the interim principal for BEAP. Dr. Watts joined the public schools of Brookline in 1989 and since then has served in a variety of roles, including school psychologist, special education team facilitator, and program coordinator. I'm very confident that under Dr. Watts' leadership, the BEAT program will continue to operate seamlessly and successfully in the 1920 school year. And I've attached my announcement letter that was sent to the BEAP community. And since my last report, I've enjoyed many school visits. On April 4th, I had the opportunity to visit Driscoll's Arts Equinox. I had planned on staying for an hour, and I think I stayed for the better part of half a day. It's an annual 2-day celebration of the arts, and it's a treasured tradition at Driscoll, during which students, teachers, administrators, and parents halt the day-to-day school activity to explore their creative side from arrival through dismissal. Through class events and activities, off-site field trips, students in all grades immerse themselves in artistic endeavors. It was my pleasure to see Arts Equinox in action, and I'm grateful to the parent volunteers who make it all possible. And I encourage anyone who has not experienced Arts Equinox to take a go at it next year. It's an incredible event. On the 4th annual Brookline Youth Climate Adaptation Challenge was held on Saturday, April 6th in the Pierce School cafeteria. I was really thrilled to be able to participate as a judge of the student projects. I was impressed with the ingenuity of our students displayed in projects that range from sustainability to environmental protection to fossil fuel-free urban design. The Youth Climate Adaptation Challenge is part of the larger celebration of Climate Spring organized by Climate Action Brookline and the Brookline Public Health Department. On Tuesday, April 9th, I attended the Driscoll faculty meeting to update staff on the progress of the school building project and the schematic design. This was an incredibly productive meeting, and we're currently scheduling multiple follow-up meetings to continue receiving faculty input into the design on the project. Those are just being scheduled for after May 7th, and I think the first one is on the calendar for May 8th. So to continue receiving input from faculty that can come back to the school building committee. On April 10th, I had the pleasure of watching second graders from Pierce perform the West African folktale, Why Mosquitoes Buzz in People's Ears. The performance was a collaborative integration of a Ghana unit of study that second graders had been working on, and they prepared for weeks. And it was an integration of the work of the music teacher and all of the second grade teachers, and it was an amazing, amazing performance. In addition, I visited Coolidge Corner, Runkle, BHS multiple times, and Pierce School again since my last reports. And then lastly, I just want to mention to the school committee that you may have seen in the tab today an article about the reorganization of guidance at BHS. And I think that what the article, I just want to share a few thoughts with the committee. What the article did not accurately capture is that the work, this specific work that's being done relative to the ACE guidance is a part of a larger overall effort at BHS to ensure both clarity of the diversity of services and to ensure that the overlap of services that exist in many places now, because there are multiple guidance counselors, school psychologists, program advisors, college to career. There's what we have heard from many students is there's all these people and I don't know who to go to. And so as we clarify and as we create that, this move is one in particular about a more equitable distribution of guidance supports across the school. And that larger picture was not captured in the article for the tab. So I just wanted to share that with the committee as a thought.
I just had a question about that. So just help me kind of figure this out a little bit. So the guidance counselor for ACE will have one office or two offices. So do you know what I'm saying?
So I need to get the specifics. I don't have the specifics.
So what I'm wondering is if even though I think it's a she, right? Her time would be divided between ACE and the general high school. Will she be available to students at ACE in a crisis, for instance, even though maybe that's not her official time, ACE?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the question is one is how are we available to any student, and so if you're a guidance counselor that has, you're focusing on something in 11th grade, or if you're the guidance counselor and program coordinator for school within a school, like how do you make yourself available? And obviously we make ourselves available when students are in crisis. I think the other thing that's important to note is that the override funded additional guidance positions, and those positions are being focused at this point in our elementary schools. We had situations in our elementaries, we had widely disparate resources in our elementary schools, and just a year ago there was an elementary school that had 1 to 550 ratio of guidance to students, and others that were closer to 1 to 225, 250. And they ranged from that 1 to 250-ish to 1 to 550 with 1 to 330, 1 to 360. And so given that so the question that I have gotten is, with the override funded guidance positions, why can't they go to the high school? And in the looking at the needs, there's a real need to get lower ratios in our elementary schools, and so that has been the early focus. Specifics of offices, I'm happy to get that, and logistics. It's something that there are folks that have been working on at the high school. I just don't have it for you.
I would just hope that they would make consideration about that. Would
Certainly.
be part of their
Certainly.
thought process.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a full-time administrator also in that program who takes care of the students too, who would be available also, and I would assume when there's a crisis also is part of that, and there's 48 students.
No, I understand that, but we want to be sensitive.
Yeah, no, it's a fair question.
With working and
Yeah.
not disrupt the.
It wasn't in response to you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Other questions for the superintendent? Ms. Manapa?
No, I sort of just wanted to add on to the conversation about ACE. We hear a lot about the program working really well, and students get really comfortable with particular staff members. And so, I don't know, I've just been thinking about how, I guess, sort of to what Ms. Federspiel was saying, getting access to staff members that they're comfortable with, whether or not it's that particular part of the scheduled time when they have that half-time access to that particular staff, and how do we best coordinate when there's an urgent need?
I think it's a fair question, and I think it's important that the guidance is just, it's in some ways different. It's not like you're a half-time, Mandarin teacher at Pearson, half-time at Driscoll. Like, your guidance, right? And you have your caseload, and you're at BHS. And so I actually think that the question is, what's the location and where's the office? But it's not that you're a guidance counselor and you're available for guidance. And it may be, if you're with one student who's in crisis and there's another one, you rely on your team in that moment to be the available person. But in terms of a split, it's just different than, it would be very different if you were halftime guidance at Lawrence and halftime guidance at Pierce. That's a really difficult, that would be a really difficult scenario, because you would, as you would imagine, I have to have my crisis moment before noon, or something, just that's a really complicated split. But it remains a full-time guidance position. And I think that's what that was lost a bit. It's a full-time guidance position, and it's a reconfiguration of caseload, but it remains full-time guidance.
All right. Thank you, Superintendent Bob. Ms. Ditkoff, Finance Subcommittee report.
Thank you. We had a couple of things on the agenda earlier this evening at Finance. One was the looking at the BEAP program, not only the internal operations of it, but also the fees that are charged in comparable programs elsewhere. And so we will get that document updated after today's conversation when it's available. And I'm not sure when we are thinking of voting a potential fee, when we're thinking of voting potential changes to BEAP fees. May 9th. Okay. So the conversation today was with respect to a 4% increase in BEAP tuition, which would still leave us well below the private preschools and still comfortably within range of kind of our comparable preschool programs. So that will come before the committee on May 9th, if anyone has any thoughts on that in advance. We also talked about the athletic program, student fees. And more than anything else, it was not a recommendation at this point to change the fee structure, but it really was a discussion of participation rates. And specifically, what was useful was thinking a little bit about what are the implications of the program while the high school renovation project is going on. So there's a meeting with the architects and the construction managers tomorrow, so I've shot them a note just to make sure that they have that on their agenda to meet with Pete and Kyle and others because it's clear that the architects and construction managers have done a tremendous amount with neighbors and with the faculty at the high school and academic faculty with Parks and Rec, but the last piece was just athletics, making sure that even just small things like where does drop-off happen could have large timing and cost implications if it takes them too long. So hopefully that will be in play also. And then there was sort of a renewed discussion of whether we should have something that's more approximating a program review for athletics in particular, just to understand not only current usage and patterns of different teams and facilities and all that sort of thing, but specifically how they're thinking about the 3 to 5 year vision, not only through construction but also through some of the growth and sort of strategically in terms of what sports and what people are interested in and how to think about that, but then also how many teams, but also things like playing fields and availability, costs of rentals as our needs grow and our athletic facilities don't necessarily grow. So that was a rich discussion. There was no immediate action item at this point, but I think over the course of the coming year, that's going to be an important discussion. The last thing that I will say, and maybe Ms. Dunn should do this one, but we had a short update on food services. It was my understanding that while we did not get any management companies' responses to RFPs, we had a good set of responses from in-house directors. And so the next set of steps on that is, we didn't quite finish that conversation about when there'll be a recommendation to the committee about that and what the role will be of Food Service Advisory Committee in terms of interviewing, in terms of site visits and or whatever the equivalent is, and that sort of thing to get someone in place for next year.
I believe that Matt has been organizing interviews over vacation week, so I know I have some interview times on my calendar, and I believe we had already discussed about having the advisory committee members be participants in that interview process, whether I just need to check in with him whether that's second round, third round. We usually do a couple different interviews But absolutely, our intention is to have the advisory committee members part of that process, since the individual will be working very closely with them, as well as Matt and I.
And it may be worth, I'm not sure when the next food service advisory committee meeting is, but it may be worth even just kind of laying out the process with some actual milestone dates on it, so that we know where we are in the process and they know where we are and what their role will be and what the role will be of what criteria we're using. I mean, we do a lot with these things for higher profile searches like principals. This isn't quite a principal, but the level of interest in the community is quite high on this. So having a really clear pathway and process for how it's going to happen, I think would be important. I think the other thing is that we were talking about, we didn't quite get to what are some of the strategies that we're going to be continuing to pursue on increasing revenues for sales. Things like tasting panels, things like additional a la carte items, all those pieces. So my sense is that Mr. Gillis had some ideas for things that could happen this year, but then obviously these things sort of need a lead time. The other thing that he presented was, so anyway, it'd be helpful to just sort of have a timeline on some of those things, especially if there are things we need to pilot this year. The only other thing that he presented was some scenarios in terms of meal price increases, which we talked about a little bit. And the bottom line is that the biggest driver, while it seems that just cutting through a lot of this, it seems that by ending the fees from Whitson's and by sort of projecting the fees of an in-house director and some the refrigerated van and the dietitian consultant, et cetera, a lot of that would more or less net out. But the cost of food he's projecting would go up by about $150,000 through our procurement versus their procurement. And so I think, he had a set of projections about what would happen with or without a meal price increase. And his projections are that without a price increase, the subsidy needed would be in the $250,000 range. And his sense of this year is that we'd land at about the $90,000 range. And that, again, most of that is driven by the cost of food. So I think he's going to still think about these numbers a little bit, especially in response to the conversation today. But I do think that his vision was going to be to ask for a meal price increase, I think, which is probably the 8th time he's asked for this, so I appreciate that. But I do think that there's a couple things that the committee was asking for, like what exactly are we going to do to get lunch price sales up, or lunch sales up? And some things are in place like sushi, but there are a number of other things that are not. And it was pointed out that a 10% increase in meal revenue does a lot. Right? It gets rid of a lot of deficit, if not all of it. So at any rate, I will just leave that there. Did I miss anything?
Thank you. Mr. Herlovsky.
So I think I'm going to be brief, actually. We did meet on April, the second week in April. I can't remember the exact date. But we discussed the things that we discussed today. The grant application for the composting at the high school, the electrification information that we talked about bus electrification. We will be meeting again on May 21st. The only thing I was wondering is if we would want to talk about the 2 rulings on the Baldwin case. I think that's public, right? What we got? No?
It is. I don't have the text of the ruling in front of me, but the short version is that the judge or the courts denied both of the temporary injunctions.
It's a long text anyway, so I'm sure that it'll be a public, but that's the gist of it, and so I think that's important that people know that. Was there anything else at the Capital Subcommittee that anybody else remembers? You were absent, that's right. But we did have a quorum. I think that's it for now, to be continued.
Thank you.
Curriculum didn't meet, I can speak for Barbara.
Right, hasn't met,
but
our fearless leader, Ms. Scotto, should be returning from her travels soon, joining us again.
Right.
Government relations.
So I did read that the House budget was released, and that the Chapter 70 funding was increased, and I'm not sure how much that means for us necessarily. Obviously, it's not in law yet. There's still the Senate budget, and then there'll be the conference budget. But it's always a good sign that it's more than what the governor's budget
so I
is.
compared it against what Melissa had used in our budget, and we're not quite at what she used in our, I believe she has a higher number in our Chapter 70 estimates for revenue. I'll do a report and email that out to you. I just did that comparison.
Okay, but to the best, didn't she use the governor's budget to determine?
No, she didn't. She used an estimate. I will do a comparison and get back to you on that. But there's some variations that we may or may not. She's still hoping that we'll get additional funds to meet her projection, I believe, is how we left our conversation before April break.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, based on what I read in the Globe, it seemed like numbers would go up, but you're saying not necessarily.
So yes, there's some number. We have to always go back to what did she project for the local receipts and what did she bake in. Yes, and then make sure that we get to that number. I'll follow up with the summary.
Okay. And there's, actually, one other thing, there's the MASC Day on the Hill, where they actually are going to be talking about Chapter 70 rather, and the legislation. I can't go this year. I think I have like 5 different meetings I have to be at. I don't know if anybody else is planning on going. I think it's
Day on the Hill, May 1st.
May 1st. Thank you. It's next week, Wednesday.
So policy met on Monday. We've talked about transgender policy, draft transgender policy, as well as a draft field trip policy. You know, the transgender policy is it's moving along, but it's challenging in a lot of ways because of some of the nexus of student privacy with parental need to know, and sometimes those two things, or not need to know, but parental desire to know about what's going on with their student, and somehow that sometimes with issues for transgender students, that it's not always a good conversation between parents and the students, so we have to be mindful of that, and that poses a lot of problems in crafting or challenges in crafting a policy. Things like student records, how we deal with student records is also proving to be sort of a thorny issue, and we're working through that with some local experts, and we hope to keep advancing that, and hopefully we'll have something for our first reading before the end of the year on that. That's I think probably a fair goal, and maybe the same thing with field trip policy. Our next meeting is May 20th. We'll probably take those 2 policies up again at that meeting. I don't know if we'll have room for anything else, but we'll see.
All right. Other additional liaisons and updates?
I already mentioned, I met with Safe Routes to Schools. We had a meeting this past Tuesday, again encouraging students and families and staff to walk, bike, and roll to school on Wednesday, May 1st. We also had Transportation Board on Monday night, where I believe there were 22 different individual votes related to the Baldwin School project. And so that's more detail than I'm going to go into right now, but it's available. And I think that's it for this week.
One just was held for further discussion, I believe. And the 2 board votes. Yes.
Yeah, there's some that were recommendations that'll go to Mass DOT that couldn't really be voted on, were not necessarily, they were recommendations and not votes. And many were unanimous votes, and some were like 4-2. But most were unanimous.
There was a recent climate action meeting where Jesse Gray presented his warrant article on electrifying our town fleet. Also at that meeting, David Lescoyer gave a presentation about pursuing all electric in terms of our buildings and the trajectory to reach that goal by 2050. We also looked at what the possible increase in cost would be if we pursued a more aggressive timetable of trying to reach that point in 2030. The general consensus committee was that we're better off aiming for 2050, that it would be more realistic. There were some members on the Climate Action Committee who were a bit concerned that we are focusing a bit too much on electrification and not as much on overall usage, that it's not enough to just have town vehicles be electric, but that we should actually be trying to reduce the need to use those vehicles. And so some of the members were concerned that we're getting a little too focused on electronics and not on use and not on our behavior.
Well, perhaps we can finish on a happy note. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, so I just wanted to let people know that the town did submit a bid for Newbury, and the deadline was the 24th. We expect to hear something back probably next week. I have a meeting on Wednesday morning, so more to come on that one. And I don't know if I'm going to steal what you're going to say, but as STEPS liaison, there was a wonderful STEPS gala last night that a number of us were able to attend. They collected a lot. They raised a lot of money, which is wonderful. Marjorie Egan was quite entertaining, and actually our superintendent was quite good.
Yes, and several of us had to go to a candidates forum, and so we didn't actually get to hear the student speakers, which is always a highlight of the steps. So I don't know if Ms. Schreiner-Olden wants to fill us in on the part we missed.
I think my favorite part of the events is always hearing from the students, and there might be at the gala they had a video presentation where the students were interviewed about what steps meant to them and had changed their experience. And if that might be something that's available, and if it is, I think that we should see if we can provide it to the entire committee, because I think that really captures what STEPS is about and the night. So that would be a great way. But it was incredibly well attended, and just another fantastic event. And
yeah, and I'm happy to ask the student who spoke, Sabrina Zhou, was the highlight of the evening. It was an incredible speech, and she spoke just brilliantly about what STEPS meant to her, and really framed it in how hard it is in a community like Brookline to be a low-income student, and sort of challenges that she faced, both real and in terms of her own sort of the way she questioned, like not inviting friends over to her house ever because feeling embarrassed to invite friends over, and how STEPS provided her with a family that supported her to really embrace herself and her future and her success. It's just a brilliant speech, and Sabrina's coming to speak to the school committee at the next meeting about student work relative to potentially adding Lunar New Year as a day of low attendance, and I won't steal their thunder and share their presentation, but I certainly will ask Sabrina to provide a copy of her speech so that those of you who weren't there can read it.
just before David, you end on your happy note.
I did. It was the STEPS guy.
Well, before you end the meeting, then I think that I would like to take a moment, and I'm sure there are others as well who would like to take a moment to recognize that this is David's last school committee meeting as chair, and just how incredibly thankful that I am for being able to work with you over your time as chair, and just think that you've been a steadfast leader who's really taken the time and the responsibility to let the superintendent and the deputy superintendents and all of the other members of school committee find their place within their roles and to really shine and to help highlight what it is people's interests are and to pull that out and to try to find liaisons that work with that. And I think that those are just small examples, but that's something that you try to do with everything that you're looking at, and you're very reflective about it and thoughtful. And it always comes back to the people, and I think that that's just such a strong, a strong asset in a leader. And so I thank you for all of your service to the school committee and to the town of Brookline, and you will be missed as chair. So if anyone
Well, I will simply say that it's been a pleasure, and it is with gratitude and humility that I set down the gavel, and thank you all for your support and your tolerance, but most of all, really, for our collegiality. This is not an easy job. I think the only thing about we all love the pay because with the denominator, it's infinite, and so the collegiality, I think, is essential to sort of sustaining us through the late nights and getting the work done. For me, that goes along with the mission and the boss, if you will, who we work for, which is 7,943 children, and that's why we're here. That those are who we serve, and that is such an honor that it has been my pleasure to learn as I lead, and I hope to continue on school committee should I be reelected and serve with all of you as we move forward. Thank you. So assuming there is no new business or old business to come before this committee, we stand adjourned.